In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Introduction: The mirage of safety. Zionism was conceived as a beacon of hope, a vision of a birthright where the Jewish people could find refuge after millennia of suffering and persecution. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a safe haven that would finally free Jews from the horrors of anti-Semitism, pogroms and systematic violence. A homeland, allowing Jewish people to flourish in security and peace. Yet, like other secular revolutions, Zionism failed to account for the complexities of divine purpose and the moral boundaries that ensure justice. Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, articulated a vision of Jewish self-determination that captivated many, just as Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin's manifestos gave birth to communism and captivated the oppressed proletariat. Akin to communism's genesis from secular Jews in the 19th century, to liberate the working class, Zionism was a secular response to Jewish suffering that sought a revolutionary change. Just as communism brought about devastation rather than utopia, Zionism has birthed new cycles of conflict and despair. Communism promised equality and the abolition of class oppression, but instead became a blueprint that led not to safety, but to conflict and death. Communism became an ideology that caused the deaths of over 94 million people, a toll incurred by dictators who ruthlessly pursued ideological purity at any cost. Zionism, although different in its goals, shares similar roots of secular idealism, promising to end Jewish suffering by creating a national homeland. Yet, in seeking to establish a homeland in the land of Greater Israel, Zionism disregarded the complexities of God's promise and the moral requirements that must be met. Instead of peace and safety, Zionism created a state of continuous tension, displacement and warfare. This book, Where Can Jews Be Safe? 7 Fatal Failures of Zionism, explores the failures of Zionism through the lens of the 7 deadly sins: sloth, envy, pride, greed, wrath, lust and gluttony. Since the establishment of Zionist Israel, millions have died in regional wars, uprisings and attacks, and millions have been displaced. What makes Zionism more dangerous than communism is its intertwining with apocalyptic beliefs. Christian Zionists, in particular, see the establishment of Zionist Israel as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, a precursor to the second coming of Christ. Infusing apocalyptic beliefs sets Zionism on a trajectory to be deadlier than communism. This apocalyptic vision adds a volatile dimension to an already tense political landscape, transforming what could be seen as a national liberation movement into an existential battleground. The consequences are not just earthly, they are cosmic. To some, this conflict is not merely about land or sovereignty, but about the fulfillment of divine prophecy, a belief that lends itself to fanaticism, in which compromise is unthinkable, and peace is not a goal but a delay of the inevitable. These failings have distorted the dream of Zionism, turning it into a force that not only imperils the Jewish people, but also brings suffering to Arabs, their brothers in lineage. Each of these failures offers insight into why Zionism, rather than creating a refuge, has led to ongoing insecurity and war. 1. Sloth. The first deadly failure of Zionism is sloth, reflected in the belief that Israel could be obtained unconditionally, that the promise made to the descendants of Isaac was eternal and beyond questioning regardless of their actions. Yet, the Bible is clear that God's covenant with the Jewish people is conditional upon their adherence to His laws. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, God explicitly outlines blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. The slothful presumption that Israel is for Jews by default, even without adherence to divine commandments, has led to suffering instead of fulfillment. The neglect of these conditions has turned a sacred promise into a source of endless bloodshed. 2. Envy. The second deadly failure is envy. For nearly 1,400 years, the descendants of Ishmael, the ancient brothers of Jews, have been blessed with Greater Israel, fulfilling the promise that God made to Abraham that his offspring would be numerous and blessed. This blessing bestowed upon the descendants of Ishmael has incited envy among the descendants of Isaac, leading to an ongoing struggle for dominance over the land. This envy, fueled by historical grievances and the perception that the blessing should belong exclusively to the Jewish people, has been a driving force behind Zionist expansionism, exacerbating tensions with the Arab world. 3. Pride. Pride is perhaps the most dangerous of Zionism's failures. It manifests in the belief that the Jewish people are superior to God's laws, that their claim to the land of Israel overrides the conditions set forth by the divine. The Bible repeatedly emphasizes the importance of humility before God and the need to obey His commandments. In Micah chapter 6 verse 8 it is written, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" Yet, Zionism's sense of superiority has led to the displacement of others, driven by a belief that they are entitled to the land unconditionally. This pride has turned a spiritual promise into a political entitlement, neglecting the moral responsibilities that come with the blessing. Greed. Greed has also played a significant role in the failures of Zionism. The expansionist policies that seek to claim more and more territory are driven by a desire to accumulate land and resources, regardless of the impact on those already residing there. This greed is at odds with the biblical injunctions against covetousness and the call to justice. Isaiah chapter 5 verse 8 warns, "Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field until there is no more room." The relentless pursuit of land has led to the construction of settlements, displacing countless Arabs and creating a landscape of injustice, rather than the justice God demands. 5. Wrath. Wrath is evident in the disproportionate use of force that has characterized much of the Zionist-Arab conflict. The Bible teaches the principle of an eye for an eye as a measure of justice, a concept that calls for proportionality and fairness. Yet, the responses to perceived threats have often been disproportionate, leading to unnecessary suffering and the loss of innocent lives. This wrath, rather than providing security, has led to a cycle of retaliation, deepening the divide between the ancient brothers, Jews and Arabs, and making true peace increasingly elusive. 6. Lust. Lust in the context of Zionism is the unchecked desire for power, the desire to dominate not only the land but also the people within it. This lust for control has led to policies of occupation and subjugation, where Arabs are denied basic rights and treated as obstacles to the Zionist dream. The Bible calls for righteousness and fair treatment of others, yet the lust for power has overshadowed these values, turning a quest for safety into an exercise in domination. 7. Gluttony. Gluttony manifests in the insatiable appetite for military power and the pursuit of influence at any cost. The endless accumulation of weapons, the overwhelming focus on military expenditure, and the relentless drive for international support, often bought through political pressure, reflect a gluttonous approach to security. This focus on militarization has come at the expense of genuine efforts toward peace, leaving both Jews and Arabs in a perpetual state of insecurity. The 7 deadly sins have transformed Zionism from a vision of hope into an ideology of exclusion and conflict. Like communism, Zionism sought to rectify an injustice, but in doing so it ignored the deeper spiritual truths that govern the world. Communism failed because it did not understand the intrinsic value of individual freedom and the importance of spiritual morality. Zionism has failed because it has disregarded the divine conditions attached to the promise of Greater Israel, assuming that power, land, and exclusivity are more important than obedience, justice, and humility. This book, Where Can Jews Be Safe? 7 Fatal Failures of Zionism, aims to reveal how each of these deadly sins has undermined the promise of safety for the Jewish people. It asks a crucial question: where can Jews truly be safe? Is it behind walls, in bunkers, and under a dome of rockets, isolated by ideology? Or is it in a shared future, built on mutual respect, where the descendants of Abraham live as brothers and sisters, embracing a shared legacy of Abraham, a legacy that calls for righteousness, justice, and compassion. The Jewish people have endured enslavement in Egypt, exile, and the unspeakable horrors of the Holocaust. Zionism was meant to provide a solution, but instead it has perpetuated new cycles of suffering. To break free from these cycles, the Jewish people must turn away from pride, envy, greed, wrath, lust, gluttony, and sloth, and instead turn toward humility, empathy, and righteousness. Only by recognizing the 7 fatal failures of Zionism can a new path be forged, one where Jews, Arabs, and all descendants of Abraham can coexist in peace, safety, and shared divine grace. The path to true safety lies not in exclusion but in inclusivity, not in dominating others, but in loving God and loving our neighbors as ourselves. This is not an anti-Jewish book. Rather, it is a critique of an ideology that has led to endless suffering and insecurity for ancient brothers. The dream of a safe haven for the Jews is a noble one, but Zionism as it stands has failed to fulfill that dream. By exploring the 7 reasons for its failure, this book invites readers, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and all who care about peace and justice, to reconsider what true safety means, and to envision a future where the descendants of Abraham can live together, not as adversaries but as part of a shared divine family. Chapter 1: Saving Slothful Semites. The land of Israel was meant to be a sanctuary, a homeland where the Jewish people could live free from persecution, safe under God's covenant. Yet today, it is the most dangerous place in the world for secular Jews. Rather than being a refuge, it is a place fraught with conflict, fear, and uncertainty. This reality starkly contrasts with the divine promises of protection and blessing, leading us to ask, why has this land, which was to be a sanctuary, become a symbol of insecurity? The answer lies in part in the sin of sloth. Sloth, as it manifests in the context of Zionism, is the presumption that Israel is unconditionally the promised land, irrespective of the divine commandments and obligations. It is a failure to heed the biblical requirements laid down for the Jewish people, requirements that demand righteousness and the fulfillment of God's laws. Instead of actively pursuing a relationship with God through humility and obedience, Zionism has relied on the mere identity of being chosen, forgetting that divine blessings are conditional upon adherence to God's covenant. Throughout the Bible, the theme of conditional blessings is reiterated. God's promise to the people of Israel is not a one-sided guarantee. It is a covenant, an agreement that depends upon the faithfulness of His people. Exodus chapter 19 verses 5-6 is clear. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. You will be for me a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. The promise hinges upon obedience. Without it, the blessings are nullified. Sloth in this context is the neglect of this fundamental truth, the laziness in assuming that blessings come without the active pursuit of righteousness. This sin of sloth has led to the belief that the Jewish people are entitled to greater Israel, irrespective of their adherence to God's commandments. In Deuteronomy chapter 4 verses 25-27, God warns that turning away from Him would lead to disaster and exile. After you have had children and grandchildren and have lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and make any kind of idol, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord your God, you will quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. It is an explicit reminder that the land is not theirs by default. It is a conditional gift, dependent on their conduct and faithfulness. Zionism's assumption that Israel could be restored unconditionally disregards these divine warnings. Deuteronomy chapter 8 verses 19-20 further states, "If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods, you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations the Lord destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God." The sin of sloth is evident in the failure to recognize that the divine promise is not a one-way street. It requires commitment and obedience. By ignoring these conditions, Zionism has led the Jewish people into a dangerous illusion that they can claim safety in the land without fulfilling the obligations of the covenant. The Bible is filled with stories of the consequences of neglecting God's conditions. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verses 63 to 64 warns that disobedience will lead to the scattering of the people. Just as it pleased the Lord to make you prosper and increase in number, so it will please him to ruin and destroy you. You will be uprooted from the land you are entering to possess. The Jewish people have experienced exile and persecution throughout history, not because they were abandoned by God, but because they abandoned His commandments. The sin of sloth is not merely inaction, it is the failure to strive for the righteousness that God requires. In Jeremiah chapter 7 verses 3 to 7, the prophet urges the people of Israel, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says, Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. If you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly, if you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave your ancestors forever and ever." The condition is clear: justice and compassion are prerequisites for the blessing of the land. Sloth in fulfilling these requirements has transformed what could have been a land of peace into a land of turmoil. The sin of sloth in Zionism also manifests in the disregard for the spiritual laws that govern the land. Ezekiel chapter 33 verses 24 to 26 addresses those who presume they are entitled to the land merely because they are descendants of Abraham. "Son of man, the people living in those ruins in the land of Israel are saying, Abraham was only one man, yet he possessed the land. But we are many. Surely the land has been given to us as our possession. Therefore say to them, This is what the sovereign Lord says, Since you eat meat with the blood still in it and look to your idols and shed blood, should you then possess the land?" The arrogance of assuming entitlement without meeting the spiritual conditions is a hallmark of slothful neglect. Deuteronomy chapter 30 verses 15 to 18 presents a choice. "See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to Him and to keep His commands. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away, and you are not obedient, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed." This passage makes it clear that the path to life and prosperity is through obedience, and that disobedience leads to destruction. Zionism, in its slothful assumption that Israel belongs to the Jewish people unconditionally, has ignored this fundamental truth. The Bible is not silent on what it means to be chosen. It emphasizes that chosenness is conditional upon righteousness. Amos chapter 3 verse 2 states, "You only have I chosen of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your sins." Being chosen does not exempt one from accountability, it heightens the expectation of obedience. The sin of sloth lies in the failure to recognize that divine favor must be earned through righteous living, not presumed as an inherent right. The consequences of this slothful presumption are visible in the current state of Israel. Far from being the safe haven envisioned, it has become a place of constant threat, with its inhabitants living under the shadow of conflict. The militarization of the state, the walls and checkpoints, and the continuous cycle of violence are the bitter fruits of ignoring the divine conditions attached to the covenant. Matthew chapter 21 verse 43 offers a stark warning. "Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you, and given to a people who will produce its fruit." The land was meant to be a blessing, but the failure to meet the conditions has turned it into a place of danger. Zionism's failure, rooted in the sin of sloth, lies in its neglect of the spiritual obligations that must be fulfilled to receive divine protection. The belief that Israel could be restored unconditionally, without adherence to the commandments of God, has led to a reality where safety is elusive, and peace is a distant hope. To find true safety, the Jewish people must move beyond this secular slothful presumption, and actively pursue the righteousness that God demands. Only by fulfilling the conditions of the covenant can the land of Israel become the sanctuary it was always meant to be, a place where God's people live in peace, under His divine protection, and in accordance with His laws. Chapter 2: Exclusive Envy. The partition of Palestine in 1948 was a monumental moment in modern history, a decision that led to the establishment of Zionist Israel and the displacement of millions of families. Originally, this partition granted 4.4% of Greater Israel to Zionist Israel. However, with an expansionist ideology, Zionist Israel has expanded 41% to occupy 7.7% of Greater Israel. Despite this expansion, the land blessed by God still remains predominantly in the hands of those who strive to keep His covenant. The remaining 92.3% of Greater Israel has been under the stewardship of Muslims, people who strive to fulfill their responsibilities under God's covenant. According to AI, the biblical description of Greater Israel, from the Nile to the Euphrates River, Genesis chapter 15 verses 18 to 21, encompasses Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Lebanon, that has been blessed to people who keep the covenant with God for nearly 1,400 years. Muslims. The concept of a Greater Israel has been promoted by several Zionist political leaders and influential figures since 1948. The idea of Greater Israel typically refers to the expansion of Zionist Israeli territory beyond the borders defined by the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947 or the pre-1967 boundaries, encompassing a larger territory that includes the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and parts of neighboring countries. 1. Mohamed Begin, Prime Minister 1977 to 1983. Mohamed Begin, leader of the Likud Party and Prime Minister from 1977 to 1983, was a proponent of the concept of a Greater Israel. Begin had previously led the Irgun, a paramilitary group that sought the creation of a Jewish state on both sides of the Jordan River. During his term, Begin supported and oversaw the expansion of settlements in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, arguing that these areas were part of the historic land of Israel, and therefore integral to the State of Israel. Begin's government passed the 1980 Jerusalem Law, which declared a unified Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel, reinforcing Israel's territorial ambitions. 2. Yitzhak Shamir, Prime Minister 1983–1984, 1986–1992. Yitzhak Shamir was another Likud leader who promoted the idea of a Greater Israel. He supported the establishment and expansion of settlements in the West Bank and Gaza, viewing these territories as part of the biblical inheritance of the Jewish people. He strongly opposed any peace process that involved territorial concessions, believing that all of the land of Israel should remain under Jewish control. 3. Ariel Sharon, Prime Minister 2001 to 2006. Ariel Sharon was a complex figure regarding territorial expansion. As a military leader, Sharon was instrumental in promoting and overseeing the establishment of settlements in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. He often spoke of the importance of the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, as part of Israel's heritage. 4. Bezalel Smotrich. Bezalel Smotrich is a prominent proponent of the concept of a Greater Israel. He advocates for expanding Jewish settlement throughout the West Bank and integrating it into Israel proper. Smotrich has called for a more aggressive approach to annexing parts of the West Bank and has consistently opposed the idea of a two-state solution. 5. Rabbi Meir Kahane, founder of Cash Party. Rabbi Meir Kahane, founder of the far-right Cash Party, was an outspoken advocate for the idea of a Greater Israel that included the West Bank, Gaza, and beyond. He argued for the expulsion of Arabs from these territories and believed in the establishment of a Jewish state based on the entirety of the biblical land of Israel. 6. Rehavam Ze'evi, Minister of Tourism. Rehavam Ze'evi, founder of the Moledet Party, was another political figure who believed in a Greater Israel. He advocated for voluntary transfer, which involved relocating Palestinians out of the West Bank and Gaza to neighboring Arab countries, enviously poisoning neighboring democracies. In addition to deadly military expansion in pursuit of stealing what God blessed to the descendants of Ishmael, Greater Israel, Zionists have deployed a strategy of destabilizing neighboring democracies. For example, 1. Toppling Mohamed Morsi of Egypt. Mohamed Morsi, Egypt's first democratically elected president and a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, was overthrown in a military coup in 2013. Israel was reported to have significant concerns about Morsi and his connections to the Muslim Brotherhood, which it viewed as a potential threat to its security. The Muslim Brotherhood historically opposed Egypt's peace treaty with Israel, the Camp David Accords, and Morsi's governance was seen as potentially destabilizing to Zionist-Egyptian relations. References: Media reports and regional analysis indicate that Israel was in close contact with Egypt's military prior to the coup against Morsi. It is alleged that Israel gave its approval or at least implicit support for the removal of Morsi. According to a report in Haaretz, Israel lobbied the United States and other Western powers to not intervene against the coup, favoring instead the stability that Egyptian military rule could bring compared to a democratically elected Islamic-led government with Morsi. Times of Israel reported that senior Zionist officials reached out to their American counterparts to support the military-led government under Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who replaced Morsi after the coup, as it provided a more stable partner for Israel in the region. 2. The Iraq War and the toppling of Saddam Hussein. Israel was a vocal proponent of regime change in Iraq under Saddam Hussein. While Israel was not directly involved in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, it played an influential role in the build-up to the war through lobbying efforts, intelligence sharing, and advocating for the necessity of removing Saddam Hussein. Zionist Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and his administration were vocal in promoting the idea that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction (WMDs) and was a significant threat to regional stability. Sharon was quoted as saying that Iraq is the greatest danger facing Israel, and that regime change was crucial. Zionist intelligence agencies reportedly provided information to the United States regarding Iraq's WMD capabilities. Some analysts have suggested that Israel exaggerated the threat posed by Saddam to push for an American intervention. While the information provided by Israel turned out to be fake, it played a role in convincing the international community, including the United States, to launch the war. Douglas Faith and Paul Wolfowitz, who were high-ranking officials in the George W. Bush administration and influential advocates for the Iraq War, had long-standing ties to pro-Israel groups in the United States. Some political commentators argue that their advocacy for the war aligned with Zionist interests in weakening a regional adversary. In 2004, former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz acknowledged that Israel was one of the key countries that had an interest in toppling Saddam Hussein. This statement further underscored how regime change in Iraq served Israel's strategic objectives for a Greater Israel. 3. Influence in Lebanon. Lebanon has been a focal point of Zionist foreign policy due to its proximity and the presence of Hezbollah, a group vehemently opposed to the expansion of Israel. Israel has a long history of intervention in Lebanon, including 1982 invasion of Lebanon. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, aiming to expel the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) and influence Lebanese politics. Israel's military intervention aimed to create a buffer zone and influence the formation of a friendly Lebanese government. It was during this period that Israel indirectly supported the rise of the South Lebanon Army, SLA, a militia loyal to Israel. Assassination campaigns. Israel has also been linked to targeted assassination campaigns of key figures within Hezbollah and Palestinian factions operating within Lebanon. Zionist efforts have been directed toward weakening groups that are hostile to Israel's expansion and strengthening allies within the fractured Lebanese political landscape. 4. Syria, influence and destabilization. Israel has historically viewed Syria as a major threat, particularly because of Syria's alliance with Iran and Hezbollah. During the ongoing Syrian civil war, Israel did not overtly engage in efforts to topple the Assad regime, but it took significant steps to influence the conflict in ways that would benefit Zionist interests. Airstrikes. Israel has conducted numerous airstrikes within Syria, primarily targeting Iranian military installations, weapon transfers, and groups aligned with Hezbollah. These strikes were intended to prevent Iranian entrenchment in Syria and maintain the status quo, with the ultimate goal of weakening Syria's strategic alliance with Iran. According to Wall Street Journal reports, Israel provided covert support to certain rebel groups operating in southern Syria, offering humanitarian aid, funds, and even medical assistance. While Israel did not aim to overthrow Bashar al-Assad directly, it attempted to prevent hostile actors from gaining a foothold close to the Golan Heights. 5. Jordan, balancing stability. Jordan is one of Israel's most crucial regional partners due to the shared border and the presence of many Palestinians within Jordan. Israel has largely refrained from destabilizing Jordan directly, recognizing its strategic importance as a buffer against more hostile actors. However, WikiLeaks documents have revealed that Israel has, at times, lobbied the United States to keep pressure on Jordan regarding Palestinian refugee resettlement, which indirectly affects the stability of Jordan's monarchy. 6. Support for Kurdish independence. Israel has supported Kurdish independence movements in Iraq and Syria as a means to destabilize those countries and weaken centralized Arab control, further escalating regional civil wars. By supporting Kurdish aspirations for autonomy, Israel hoped to undermine neighboring governments and create a friendly ally in a geopolitically strategic area. In 2017, Israel was the only country to openly support the Kurdish independence referendum in Iraqi Kurdistan. The potential breakup of Iraq into smaller entities would reduce the strength of a state that had historically been hostile to Israel's expansion. 7. Historical strategy and doctrine, the periphery doctrine. Israel's strategy in influencing its neighbors can also be understood through its historical periphery doctrine. This was a policy adopted in the 1950s and 1960s, where Israel sought alliances with non-Arab regional powers, such as Turkey, Iran before the revolution, and Ethiopian groups, as a way to offset hostility from immediate Arab neighbors. This doctrine influenced Israel's approach to destabilizing neighboring governments, funding civil wars and supporting minorities or groups, like Kurds, to counterbalance governments in the region. While Israel has not always directly overthrown governments, it has engaged in activities that support the destabilization or weakening of neighboring states for the long-term expansion and envy for Greater Israel, at the expense of killing millions. Israel's support for regime change, lobbying efforts, and involvement in regional civil wars have all been elements of its envy. Post-stealing billions in land through mass murder, bribing billions from America, and sabotaging neighboring democracies, the Zionists brag to be better, but fester in envy because trillions in efforts only earned less safety globally. Despite tenacious Zionist worldwide broadcasting propaganda dehumanizing Muslims as terrorists, barbarians, and animals, while assassinating key scientists and intellectuals, God still blesses their brother descendants of Ishmaelites with Greater Israel, because it's not about what humans are convinced of, it's about what God sees. Throughout the 1,400 years preceding 1948, the tone of Jewish attitudes toward Muslims was characterized by appreciation, respect, and genuine gratitude. Jewish leaders across the world expressed immense admiration for Muslim rulers and their subjects, recognizing the sanctuary that was provided to them during times of extreme peril. During the Crusades, while European Christians slaughtered countless Jews in the name of religion, Muslim empires such as those led by Saladin and others offered Jews refuge and dignity. This mutual bond, forged under duress, was reinforced by the coexistence and cooperation that characterized much of Islamic Spain and the Ottoman Empire, where Jews were able to flourish as scholars, doctors, poets and thinkers, protected and celebrated for their contributions. Many Jewish leaders wrote eloquently about the justice and fairness of their Muslim protectors, highlighting the spirit of interfaith cooperation that defined a significant chapter in Jewish history, as Muslims obey the covenant to honor and protect Jews. However, after the establishment of the State of Zionist Israel in 1948, the tone underwent a seismic shift. This shift was not gradual, but rather a dramatic turn, driven by the new Zionist ideology that aimed to reshape the Jewish identity in opposition to its historical narrative of peaceful coexistence. Zionism's goal was the creation of a Jewish homeland, a Greater Israel, which inherently involved displacing the existing Muslim population. Thus, a powerful and relentless propaganda campaign began, fueled by envy and fear. The Muslims who once protected and harbored Jews were reimagined as enemies. This propaganda served a dual purpose: to justify the ongoing displacement and mistreatment of Muslims, and to rally global Jewish support for the Zionist cause, often at the expense of historical truths and alliances. The turncoat in Jewish opinion, from praising Muslims as protectors to portraying them as existential threats, marks a deep fracture not only in Jewish-Muslim relations but also in Jewish self-perception. In the 19th century, prominent Jewish intellectuals like Moses Montefiore openly admired the fairness of Muslim governance in the Middle East. Fast forward to the 21st century, Zionist leaders speak of Muslims in a tone laced with condescension and hostility, disseminating narratives that are designed to evoke fear, hatred, and an unquestioned loyalty to the Zionist cause. This shift was strategic, born from envy over the lands of Greater Israel, which were predominantly inhabited by Muslims, and an attempt to legitimize territorial expansion by painting the inhabitants as less deserving and less human. Zionism's global propaganda campaign, sophisticated and far-reaching, has reshaped the world's perception of Muslims. By leveraging influential media outlets, political connections and cultural platforms, Zionist leaders managed to redefine the Muslim, not as a fellow child of Abraham, but as an obstacle to be overcome. This campaign has left an indelible mark on the Western consciousness, where Muslims are often first associated with extremism and violence, rather than the rich history of intellectualism, hospitality, and culture they share with Jews. The tragedy lies in how quickly the narrative flipped, disregarding centuries of mutual support and shared prosperity in favor of fear-driven polarization. This manipulation of collective memory, turning friends into foes, has not only perpetuated violence, but has also deprived both Jews and Muslims of the empathy needed to heal and move forward together. Many Zionist leaders have viewed the establishment of settlements and the expansion of territory as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. However, they are mostly envious atheists who brandish Bibles as a scheme to steal land from neighbors. These envious atheists reject Jesus as the Messiah and do not follow the laws of Moses, giving Muslims favor from God for 1,400 years. The partition of Palestine in 1948, which allocated only 4.4% of Greater Israel to Zionist Israel, left many feeling that the Jewish people had been denied their full inheritance. The subsequent expansion to 7.7% of Zionist Israel represents a gradual attempt to achieve what some perceive as their divine right. This expansion has come at the cost of ongoing conflict and suffering for both Jews and Muslims. The Bible, however, speaks of God's blessing as being for all the descendants of Abraham, not just for Isaac but also for Ishmael. Genesis 17:20 clearly shows that God intended to bless Ishmael and make him a great nation. The idea that only the Jewish people are entitled to Greater Israel contradicts the inclusive nature of God's promise. Malachi chapter 2 verse 10 reminds us, "Do we not all have one Father? Did not one God create us?" The tribalism that drives the expansionist ideology is a form of envy, rooted in a desire to reclaim a blessing that was never meant to be exclusive. The sin of envy has driven many of Israel's leaders to pursue policies that seek to expand territory at any cost, disregarding the divine command to act with justice and compassion. Genesis chapter 17 verses 4-5 reminds us that Abraham was to be the father of many nations, not just one. The expansionist policies of the past decades have been fueled by a desire to control what others have, a desire that has only led to more conflict and instability. God's blessings are not a tribal entitlement, they are a divine gift for all who follow His commandments. The pursuit of Greater Israel through expansion and displacement reflects a sin of envy, a desire to take what others have been blessed with, rather than striving to fulfill the conditions of God's covenant. The leaders who have pursued this vision have done so at the cost of peace, justice, and the well-being of both Jews and Muslims. It is time to recognize that God's blessings are meant to be shared, not hoarded, that the land is not an exclusive gift, but a shared inheritance for all the children of Abraham. To understand the roots of Zionist envy, one must first acknowledge the historical and tribal origins of the Jewish people. Jews, as a distinct people, did not exist until the formation of the tribe of Judah, which occurred around 931 BCE, following the division of Solomon's kingdom into Judah and Israel. The tribal identity that characterized the early Jewish people has persisted into modern times, fostering an us vs them mentality that often veers into tribalism. This tribalism, like a tribe of wolves eyeing the possessions of a neighboring pride of lions, has fostered a spirit of envy, an attitude that sees the blessings of others as threats rather than opportunities for mutual growth. God, however, is not a tribal deity. He is not racist, nor does He show favoritism based on bloodlines or ancestry. The Bible is replete with verses that demonstrate that God's blessings are for all humanity, not an exclusive inheritance for a select few. Genesis 17:20 records God's promise to Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn. "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him, I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." This promise makes it clear that God's blessings are not confined to the descendants of Isaac alone. They extend to Ishmael and his descendants as well. Genesis chapter 25 verses 1-6 further demonstrates the inclusivity of God's promise. Abraham had other children with Keturah, and he gave gifts to them, recognizing their place in the world. God is not exclusive in His blessings, and the idea that only the descendants of Isaac are entitled to the land or to His favor is a gross misinterpretation of the divine will. Deuteronomy 4:37 speaks of God's love for the patriarchs, yet this love is not a blanket endorsement, it is conditional upon obedience and righteousness. The sin of envy has also led to a distorted interpretation of the covenant. John 8:39 records Jesus saying to the Pharisees, "If you were Abraham's children, then you would do what Abraham did." The true children of Abraham are not defined by their bloodline, but by their actions. This idea is echoed in Romans chapter 4 verses 11-12, where Paul explains that Abraham is the father of all who believe, not just the circumcised. This means that the blessing of Israel is not an exclusive ethnic entitlement. It is open to all who strive to live in accordance with God's will. Galatians chapter 3 verses 7-9 affirms, "Understand then that those who have faith are children of Abraham. So those who rely on faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith." The Zionist claim to exclusive ownership of the land reflects a tribal envy that fails to understand the universality of God's promise. 1 Timothy chapter 1 verse 4 and Titus chapter 3 verse 9 warn against engaging in meaningless genealogies and controversies that promote division rather than unity. God is not interested in tribal divisions. He is interested in the righteousness of all his children. Genesis 1:27 reminds us that God created mankind in his own image, emphasizing the equality of all human beings. Deuteronomy chapter 10 verses 17 to 19 declares that God shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. You are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. The sin of envy contradicts this fundamental teaching of divine impartiality and universal love. Job chapter 34 verse 19 also emphasizes that God shows no partiality to princes and does not favor the rich over the poor. The Zionist envy of the blessings enjoyed by Muslims for the last 1,400 years stems from a misunderstanding of what it means to be truly chosen by God. Proverbs chapter 22 verse 2 states, "Rich and poor have this in common, the Lord is the maker of them all." God does not bless one group to the exclusion of another. Matthew 22:39 teaches, "Love your neighbor as yourself," a commandment that leaves no room for envy or tribalism. The partition of Palestine and the subsequent expansion of Zionist Israel were driven by an envious desire to reclaim what was seen as an exclusive right. Yet, as Acts chapter 10 verses 34 to 35 tells us, God does not show favoritism but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. The Muslims who have occupied Greater Israel for centuries are those who strive to live in accordance with God's will, fulfilling the conditions of the covenant that Zionism has failed to meet. The word Muslim is an adjective. It describes people who submit to the will of God, who live in faith and obedience. It means people who only fear God, rejecting all other fears and finding true security in him alone. The sin of envy is rooted in insecurity, in the fear that someone else's blessing diminishes one's own. Yet the teachings of Jesus and the prophets make it clear that God's love and blessings are boundless. They are not diminished by being shared. The cure for the sin of envy lies in the recognition that we are all God's children, equally deserving of his love and favor. Only fearing God and striving to fulfill his covenant bring true security. Envy is born of a fear that others will take what is ours, but if we truly fear God alone, we will understand that his blessings are infinite and available to all who seek him in righteousness. Zionism's envy of the blessings enjoyed by the Muslims who have inhabited Greater Israel is not only misplaced, but fundamentally contrary to the teachings of God. Isaiah chapter 56 verses 6 to 7 declares, "And foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord and to be his servants, these I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer." Envy has led to the expansionist policies that have transformed Zionist Israel from a place of refuge into a battleground. The solution to this envy lies in embracing the universal nature of God's blessings. God is not a tribal deity favoring one group over another. He is the creator of all, and his blessings are for all who strive to live in faith, righteousness, and humility. The true path to safety and security for the Jewish people is not in the exclusive claim to land, but in the inclusive embrace of God's will, in recognizing that the blessings of Greater Israel are for all of Abraham's children, whether they are Jew, Christian, or Muslim. To overcome the sin of envy is to acknowledge that there is enough of God's love for everyone, and that true security lies not in possessing land, but in possessing a heart that fears only God. Chapter 3: Prophetic Pride. Pride is a dangerous and ancient sin committed by the ancestors of Zionism more than anyone. Pride can lead individuals, communities, and nations to ruin. It is this sin that has deeply permeated the foundation of Zionism, transforming a spiritual journey into a political conquest defined by superiority and defiance against divine laws. Just as the Bible recounts tales of prideful arrogance leading to severe consequences, the sin of pride has manifested itself prominently in Zionism, as it pushes forward an agenda that places its goals above God's commandments. As Zionist Israel's founding fathers moved forward, the ideology shifted towards something dangerous, a nationalistic fervor marked by hubris and a sense of exceptionalism. Pride became a guiding force, and with it came the defiance of God's guidance. Zionism's continued denial of the Messiah. The ultimate manifestation of this pride is the denial of the foretold Messiah, Jesus Christ. Numerous prophecies in the Hebrew Bible align with the coming of Jesus, yet many Jewish leaders rejected him as the Messiah. Genesis chapter 49 verse 10 says, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." This prophecy points to the arrival of a messianic figure, a descendant of Judah, who Christians believe is Jesus. However, Jewish leaders in their pride and insistence on their own interpretation refused to accept him. This rejection extended even further when Prophet Muhammad appeared centuries later, with a message that confirmed Jesus as the Messiah and fulfilled the monotheistic lineage of Abraham. In Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18, God declares, "I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth." Muslims believe that this verse points to Muhammad, a prophet who continued the Abrahamic mission of monotheism. The refusal to accept both Jesus and Muhammad as divine messengers signifies the ultimate act of pride, placing one's own judgment above that of God and rejecting his chosen messengers. The killing of prophets, a historical defiance. The sin of pride in placing oneself above God has not been limited to the rejection of Messiah Jesus and Prophet Muhammad. It also extended to the treatment of earlier prophets. Throughout the Bible, there are accounts of Jewish leaders killing prophets who were sent by God to guide them back to the righteous path. In Nehemiah chapter 9 verse 26 it says, "But they were disobedient and rebelled against you. They put your law behind their backs. They killed your prophets, who had warned them in order to turn them back to you." This verse illustrates a deep-seated defiance, a refusal to heed the warnings of God's messengers. This sense of superiority led to the belief that they could silence the voice of God by killing those who carried his message. In Matthew chapter 23 verse 31, Jesus himself confronts the religious leaders saying, "So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets." This tragic history is marked by the arrogance of believing that human power and authority could override divine will. The Talmud and the superiority to God's law. The arrogance of Zionism is also rooted in the teachings of the Talmud, which in some instances positions itself as superior to the Torah. The Talmud was intended as a commentary on the Torah, expanding upon Jewish law and providing guidance for practical application. However, in practice, it has often been elevated above the Torah, with some teachings directly contradicting God's commandments. For example, Exodus chapter 21 verse 24 commands eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Yet the Talmud, Bava Kama 83b-84, reinterprets this to mean monetary compensation rather than literal retribution. This reinterpretation reflects the belief that human interpretation could alter or improve upon God's original command. Similarly, while Leviticus 19:11 teaches "do not lie," the Talmud, Bava Kama 113a, allows Jews to lie to non-Jews. Such teachings contradict the divine law and demonstrate a belief that human wisdom can override the wisdom of God. Modern manifestations of pride, Zionist laws and policies. This prideful defiance has persisted into the modern day, manifesting in Zionist laws and policies that elevate Jewish identity above others, disregarding the inclusive spirit of God's covenant. The Nation-State Law, 2018, explicitly declares Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people, excluding non-Jews from the right of self-determination. This law reflects a belief that Jews alone are entitled to the land, a direct contradiction to the Bible's teachings that God's blessings are conditional upon righteousness, not ethnicity. Furthermore, the law of return allows Jews anywhere in the world to immigrate to Israel, while Palestinians, many of whom were displaced from their ancestral homes, are denied the right to return. This policy reveals an inherent belief in the superiority of Jewish identity over others, reinforcing a sense of entitlement that has no basis in divine law. Deuteronomy chapter 10 verses 17 to 19 states, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes." God's blessings are not exclusive to one group of people, they are for all those who follow His commandments. The pride that defines Zionism is a dangerous sin, one that has led to the rejection of God's messengers, the reinterpretation of His laws, and the establishment of policies that contradict His commandments. This arrogance has resulted in suffering, not only for those who have been oppressed but also for those who cling to the illusion of superiority. The Bible repeatedly warns against pride, emphasizing the importance of humility and obedience. In Proverbs chapter 16 verse 18 it says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." Zionism's prideful pursuit of Greater Israel, based on an unconditional sense of entitlement, disregards God's covenant and threatens to lead the Jewish people down a path of destruction. Only by embracing humility, recognizing the conditional nature of God's blessings, and accepting the messengers He has sent, can the Jewish people find true safety and fulfillment. The journey towards peace and security begins with rejecting the sin of pride and returning to the covenant, a covenant that is open to all those who choose to obey and submit to God's will. Bible verses that describe God promising Israel to be given over to non-Israelite nations, such as the Assyrians and Babylonians, due to Jews' superiority to God. These verses highlight the conditional nature of Israel's possession of the land, emphasizing that their blessings could be lost if they failed to obey God. 1. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Halah, in Gozan on the Habor River, and in the towns of the Medes. Explanation: Assyria captured Samaria and took the Israelites into exile due to their disobedience. 2. 2 Kings chapter 18 verses 11 to 12. The king of Assyria deported Israel to Assyria and settled them in Halah, in Gozan on the Habor River, and in the towns of the Medes. This happened because they had not obeyed the Lord their God, but had violated His covenant, all that Moses the servant of the Lord commanded. Explanation: The Assyrians took Israel into exile as punishment for their violation of God's covenant. 3. 2 Kings chapter 25 verses 8 to 10. On the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, an official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. Explanation: The Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and took possession of the land, marking God's judgment against the Israelites. 4. Jeremiah chapter 25 verse 9. I will summon all the peoples of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, declares the Lord, and I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn, and an everlasting ruin. Explanation: God used Nebuchadnezzar to bring judgment on the Israelites for their disobedience, allowing Babylon to conquer them. 5. Jeremiah chapter 29 verses 4 to 7. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon: Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Explanation: God acknowledges that He allowed the Babylonians to take the Israelites into exile due to their failure to obey Him. 6. Jeremiah chapter 39 verses 1–2. In the 9th year of Zedekiah king of Judah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon marched against Jerusalem with his whole army and laid siege to it. And on the 9th day of the 4th month of Zedekiah's 11th year, the city wall was broken through. Explanation: the Babylonians captured Jerusalem, which was a direct result of the Israelites' disobedience. 7. 2 Chronicles chapter 36 verse 17. He brought up against them the king of the Babylonians, who killed their young men with the sword in the sanctuary, and did not spare young men or young women, the elderly or the infirm. God gave them all into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. Explanation: God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to conquer the Israelites due to their continued disobedience. 8. Isaiah chapter 10 verses 5–6. Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath. I send him against a godless nation, I dispatch him against a people who anger me. Explanation: God sent the Assyrians as instruments of his anger against the disobedient Israelites. 9. Isaiah chapter 39 verses 6–7. The time will surely come when everything in your palace, and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day, will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. And some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Explanation: God prophesied that Babylon would take away all the treasures of Israel as a result of their disobedience. 10. Ezekiel chapter 21 verses 25–27. You profane and wicked prince of Israel, whose day has come, whose time of punishment has reached its climax, this is what the sovereign Lord says: take off the turban, remove the crown. It will not be as it was. The lowly will be exalted, and the exalted will be brought low. A ruin! A ruin! I will make it a ruin. The crown will not be restored until he to whom it rightfully belongs shall come. To him I will give it. Explanation: God declares that Israel will be brought low, and others will be given authority until a rightful ruler arises. 11. Lamentations chapter 1 verse 5. Her foes have become her masters, her enemies are at ease. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone into exile, captive before the foe. Explanation: God allowed enemies to conquer Israel and take its people into exile due to their sins. 12. Daniel chapter 1 verse 1–2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. Explanation: God delivered Judah into the hands of the Babylonians as a result of their disobedience. 13. Ezekiel chapter 33 verses 28–29. I will make the land a desolate waste, and her proud strength will come to an end, and the mountains of Israel will become desolate so that no one will cross them. Then they will know that I am the Lord, when I have made the land a desolate waste because of all the detestable things they have done. Explanation: God warned that he would make Israel desolate because of their sins, indicating a removal of blessings. 14. Amos chapter 5 verse 27. Therefore I will send you into exile beyond Damascus, says the Lord whose name is God Almighty. Explanation: God declared that the Israelites would be sent into exile due to their disobedience. 15. Jeremiah chapter 13 verse 19. The cities in the Negev will be shut up, and there will be no one to open them. All Judah will be carried into exile, carried completely away. Explanation: God foretells that Judah would be carried away into exile as a consequence of their sins. 16. Jeremiah chapter 16 verse 13. So I will throw you out of this land into a land neither you nor your ancestors have known, and there you will serve other gods day and night, for I will show you no favor. Explanation: God declared that he would throw Israel out of their land for their unfaithfulness. 17. Hosea chapter 9 verse 3. They will not remain in the Lord's land. Ephraim will return to Egypt and eat unclean food in Assyria. Explanation: God stated that Ephraim, a reference to Israel, would be taken to Assyria due to their disobedience. 18. Micah chapter 1 verse 6. Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley, and lay bare her foundations. Explanation: God promised to destroy Samaria, and lay it waste due to their prideful actions. 19. Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 6. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. Explanation: God declared that he was raising up the Babylonians to take over lands including Israel, as judgment for sin. 20. Jeremiah chapter 20 verses 4-5. For this is what the Lord says: I will make you a terror to yourself and to all your friends. With your own eyes you will see them fall by the sword of their enemies. I will give all Judah into the hands of the king of Babylon, who will carry them away to Babylon or put them to the sword. I will deliver all the wealth of this city into the hands of their enemies, all its products, all its valuables and all the treasures of the kings of Judah. They will take it away as plunder, and carry it off to Babylon. Explanation: God declared that Judah would be handed over to Babylon as a result of their unfaithfulness. These verses from the Bible highlight that Israel was given over to non-Israelite nations, such as the Assyrians and Babylonians, due to their persistent disobedience and unfaithfulness to God. The verses show the conditional nature of God's blessings, emphasizing that the land and covenant were not unconditionally guaranteed to the Israelites, but were instead dependent on their righteous behavior and obedience to God's commandments. Bible verses predicting Messiah Jesus. 1. Genesis chapter 49 verse 10. The scepter from Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. This verse is understood as a prophecy of the Messiah coming from the tribe of Judah, which aligns with the lineage of Jesus, who is identified as a descendant of Judah through King David. 2. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14. The virgin birth. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign: the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Christians interpret this verse as a prophecy of Jesus' miraculous birth. The term Emmanuel means God's guidance with us. 3. Micah chapter 5 verse 2. Birth in Bethlehem. But you, Bethlehem Ephrath, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Christians believe this verse predicts the birthplace of Jesus, who was born in Bethlehem as described in the Gospels. It also suggests the ruler has a divine origin, from ancient times, which Christians interpret as referring to Jesus. 4. Isaiah chapter 53 verses 3-5. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. This entire chapter is interpreted by Christians as a detailed prophecy of Jesus' suffering, crucifixion, and sacrificial role in atoning for humanity's sins. The suffering servant is seen as a prefiguration of Jesus' death and redemptive work. 5. Psalm chapter 22 verses 1:16-18. The suffering and forsaken Messiah. My God, why have you forsaken me? They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display, people stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. Psalm is often seen as a prophecy of Jesus' crucifixion. The description of hands and feet being pierced, and the dividing of garments, is viewed as foreshadowing the events of Jesus' presumed death as described in the Gospels. 6. Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9. The triumphal entry. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Christians interpret this verse as a prophecy of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, where he rode on a donkey, fulfilling this image of a humble king, coming in peace. 7. Zechariah chapter 12 verse 10. Mourning for the pierced one. And I will pour out on the house of David, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child. Christians see this as a prophecy that points to Jesus' crucifixion, where he was pierced on the cross. The mourning is seen as indicative of repentance and recognition of Jesus' identity as the Messiah. 8. Daniel chapter 9 verses 24-26. The Anointed One cut off. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness. After the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be put to death and will have nothing. This prophecy is often seen as pointing to the coming of an Anointed One, Messiah. Bible verses predicting Prophet Muhammad. 9. Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 18. A prophet like Moses. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. Muslims believe this verse could refer to Muhammad because he shared certain qualities with Moses, such as leading a nation, establishing laws, and being a prophet for a large community. Additionally, the phrase "put my words in his mouth" resonates with how Muslims believe Muhammad received the Quran orally. 10. Deuteronomy chapter 33 verse 2. The coming from Paran. The Lord came from Sinai and dawned over them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with myriads of holy ones from the south, from his mountain slopes. Mount Paran is traditionally associated with the region around Mecca in Islamic tradition, where Ishmael, the forefather of Arabs and by extension Muhammad, settled. Some Muslim scholars interpret this verse as alluding to the emergence of Islam in Arabia, as it refers to Paran as a place from which a revelation or divine presence shone forth. 11. Isaiah chapter 42 verses 1-4, 11. The servant of God and the people of Kedar. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. Let the wilderness and its towns raise their voices, let the settlements where Kedar lives rejoice. Kedar is traditionally identified as one of the sons of Ishmael, and is linked to the Arab people. This chapter describes a servant of God who brings justice and a law for the nations, which some Muslims believe aligns with Muhammad's role in establishing social justice and law in Arabia. 12. Song of Solomon chapter 5 verse 16. Muhammadim. His mouth is sweetness itself, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, this is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem. The Hebrew word machamad in this verse, translated as altogether lovely or desirable, has a root similar to the name Muhammad. Some Muslim scholars interpret this as an indirect mention of Muhammad. 13. John chapter 14 verses 16 to 17. The Comforter or Advocate, Paraclete. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another Advocate, Paraclete, to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of Truth. Muslims view the term Paraclete as referring to a future prophet, and some believe this was a prediction of Muhammad. 14. John chapter 16 verses 7 to 14. The Spirit of Truth. But very truly I tell you, it is for your good that I am going away. Unless I go away, the Advocate will not come to you, but if I go, I will send him to you. But when he, the Spirit of Truth, comes, he will guide you into all the truth. Muslims interpret the Spirit of Truth as a reference to Muhammad, viewing the phrase as describing the guidance that Muhammad provided in the Quran, which Muslims consider the final and complete truth revealed by God. 15. Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 3. The Holy One from Mount Paran. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. 16. Deuteronomy chapter 33 verse 2. He said, The Lord came from Sinai and dawned over them from Seir, he shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with the myriads of holy ones from the south, from his mountain slopes. Mount Paran is a reference to the Arabian Peninsula, particularly the area around Mecca, and view this as a prophecy about Muhammad, whose message would reach across nations and be widely praised. 17. Isaiah chapter 29 verse 12. The unlearned prophet. Or if you give the scroll to someone who cannot read and say, Read this please, they will answer, I don't know how to read. This verse is interpreted by some Muslims as referring to the prophet, Muhammad, who was famously unlettered, not formally taught to read or write, and received the first Quranic revelation from the angel Gabriel with the command, Read. Iqra in Surah Al-Alaq 96-1-5. Muhammad responded, I cannot read, aligning with this verse in Isaiah. 18. John chapter 16 verse 13. The Spirit of Truth. But when he, the Spirit of Truth, comes, he will guide you into all the truth. He will not speak on his own, he will speak only what he hears, and he will tell you what is yet to come. Muslims believe that the Spirit of Truth refers to Muhammad, who is said to have conveyed God's revelations, the Quran, as he received them. They interpret he will not speak on his own, as indicative of Muhammad's role in delivering the words of the Quran as direct revelation from God, rather than his own teachings. 19. John chapter 1 verses 19-21. Question about the prophet. Now this was John's testimony, when the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, I am not the Messiah. They asked him, Then who are you? Are you Elijah? He said, I am not. Are you the prophet? He answered, No. Here, a prophet is interpreted by Muslims to mean a specific future prophet, distinct from Elijah and the Messiah. Since John denies being the prophet, some Islamic scholars suggest that this refers to Muhammad, as the Jews of that time anticipated the coming of another prophet besides Elijah and the Messiah. 20. Matthew chapter 21 verses 42-43. A new nation. Jesus said to them, Have you never read in the scriptures, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, the Lord has done this and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you, and given to a people who will produce its fruit. Muslims interpret a people who will produce its fruit as referring to the Muslim community established by Muhammad. They see this as a reference to the transfer of spiritual leadership to a new community that would embrace monotheism and produce fruit through devotion and adherence to God's guidance. 21. Isaiah chapter 60 verses 6-7. interpreted as including Ishmael's descendants. Prediction of the Dome of the Rock being the rebuilt Third Temple. Herds of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah. And all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord. All Kedar's flocks will be gathered to you, the rams of Nebaioth will serve you, they will be accepted as offerings on my altar, and I will adorn my glorious temple. Kedar and Nebaioth are traditionally understood to be descendants of Ishmael. In this vision, they are portrayed as bringing offerings to God's temple, symbolizing inclusion and reverence. This does not indicate possession of the land, but it does suggest a connection between Ishmael's descendants and future blessings related to Israel. Bible verses on superiority to God's prophets. 21. 1 Kings chapter 18 verse 4. Destroying the true prophets. Jezebel, supported by the ruling elite, killed the prophets of God, showing superiority to God's messengers. Their belief in their political power took precedence over God's word. 22. Nehemiah chapter 9 verse 26. But they were disobedient and rebelled against you. They put your law behind their backs. They killed your prophets who had warned them in order to turn them back to you. They committed awful blasphemies. Nehemiah speaks of how the people of Israel killed the prophets who were sent to guide them back to God. 23. 2 Chronicles chapter 24 verses 20 to 21. Then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest. He stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you." But they plotted against him, and by order of the king they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. Zechariah, a prophet, was stoned to death by the people of Israel. 24. Jeremiah chapter 2 verse 30. In vain I punished your people, they did not respond to correction. Your sword has devoured your prophets like a ravenous lion. 25. Jeremiah chapter 26 verses 20 to 23. King Jehoiakim, however, sent Elnathan son of Akbor to Egypt along with some other men. They brought Uriah out of Egypt and took him to King Jehoiakim, who had him struck down with a sword, and his body thrown into the burial place of the common people. Uriah was another prophet who was killed for speaking the truth. 26. 1 Kings chapter 19 verse 10. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Elijah laments how the Israelites killed the prophets of God. 27. Matthew chapter 23 verse 31. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Jesus confronts the Pharisees and religious leaders about their ancestors' actions of killing the prophets. 28. Matthew chapter 23 verse 37. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus mourns for Jerusalem, for killing the prophets sent to her. 29. Luke chapter 11 verses 47 to 48. Woe to you, because you build tombs for the prophets, and it was your ancestors who killed them. So you testify that you approve of what your ancestors did. They killed the prophets and you build their tombs. Jesus rebukes the religious leaders for their hypocrisy regarding the prophets. 30. Acts chapter 7 verse 52. Was there ever a prophet your ancestors did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and murdered him. Stephen, before being stoned, accuses the Jewish leaders of killing the prophets and betraying Jesus, the righteous one. 31. Matthew chapter 21 verse 35. The tenants seized his servants, they beat one, killed another and stoned a third. In the parable of the tenants, Jesus speaks of how the servants, prophets, sent by the owner God, were mistreated and killed. 32. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 37. They were put to death by stoning, they were sawed in two, they were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted and mistreated. This passage speaks generally of the prophets, who were persecuted and killed. 33. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 15. Who killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets and also drove us out. They displease God and are hostile to everyone. Paul accuses the people of killing both Jesus and the prophets. 34. Matthew chapter 5 verse 12. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus acknowledges that the prophets before his time were persecuted. 35. Luke chapter 20 verse 15. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? Refers to the parable of the tenants, where Jesus predicts his own death after the death of other messengers, prophets. 36. Romans chapter 11 verse 3. Lord, they have killed your prophets and torn down your altars. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. Paul quotes Elijah, referencing the killing of prophets by the Israelites. 37. Matthew chapter 23 verses 29 to 30. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Jesus points out the hypocrisy of the religious leaders, whose ancestors killed the prophets. 38. John chapter 8 verse 40. As it is, you are looking for a way to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. Abraham did not do such things. Jesus accuses the people of trying to kill him, just as they had persecuted other prophets who spoke God's truth. This misplaced arrogance and perceived superiority over God's will has been a recurring theme throughout history, leading to cycles of judgment and consequence. Bible verses on superiority to God's laws. 39. Leviticus chapter 25 verses 8 to 17. Ignoring the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year was meant to release debts and free the enslaved. Historical evidence suggests that the Israelites did not consistently observe this, showing a disregard for God's command to forgive debts and give people a fresh start. 40. Jeremiah chapter 23 verse 16. False prophecies. God warned against false prophets who claimed to speak in his name. By spreading lies as if they were divine truth, they placed their own words above God's, demonstrating a sense of superiority. 41. Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 6. Disregarding the temple's sacredness. The Israelites brought idols into the temple, desecrating God's holy place. This act demonstrated their belief that they could redefine the sacred space that God himself had defined. 42. Genesis chapter 37 verses 3 to 4. Jacob showed favoritism among his sons, especially for Joseph, which went against the principles of equality and justice. God's intention was for all his children to be treated with love, yet Jacob's favoritism led to jealousy and division among his descendants. 43. Genesis chapter 37 verse 28. Joseph's brothers, all descendants of Sarah through Isaac, sold him into slavery out of jealousy and hatred. This act violated God's moral commandments, demonstrating their sense of superiority over their brother's fate, rather than respecting God's plan for all of Abraham's descendants. 44. Leviticus chapter 19 verses 33 to 34. Throughout history, Israelites were instructed to treat foreigners kindly. However, the descendants of Sarah frequently excluded and mistreated those outside their lineage, disregarding God's inclusive instructions. 45. 1 Samuel chapter 15. King Saul, a descendant of Sarah, disobeyed God by sparing the Amalekite king and taking spoils from the battle. Despite God's explicit instructions, this act of defiance showed that he considered his judgment superior to God's. 46. 1 Samuel chapter 10 verse 27. Refusal to honor God's anointed king. When Saul was chosen as king, some Israelites refused to honor him, showing that they thought their judgment was superior to God's choice. 47. Exodus chapter 32 verses 1 to 6. During the Exodus, Aaron, a descendant of Sarah, allowed the Israelites to create and worship the golden calf. This was a direct act of defiance against God's commandments forbidding idolatry. 48. Numbers chapter 14 verses 1 to 4. Failure to trust in God's protection. After hearing the report from the spies, the Israelites doubted God's ability to protect them and proposed returning to Egypt, which demonstrated a lack of trust in God's plan. 49. Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 31. Sacrifice of own children. The Israelites built high places in the valley of Ben Hinnom to sacrifice their sons and daughters, an act completely against God's command, showing disregard for his values. 50. Isaiah chapter 30 verses 9 to 10. Refusal to repent. God describes the people as rebellious, unwilling to listen to his instructions. They insisted on pleasant lies rather than divine truth, placing their comfort over God's guidance. 51. 1 Samuel chapter 13 verses 8 to 14. Saul's self-preservation. King Saul offered sacrifices that only Samuel was supposed to perform, choosing to prioritize his own fears over obedience to God's command. 52. 2 Samuel chapter 24 verses 1 to 4. David's census. King David conducted a census against God's implied command, indicating his reliance on numbers and military strength, rather than trusting God's provision. 53. Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 17. Rejecting God's command against wealth. Kings were instructed not to accumulate excessive wealth, yet King Solomon amassed wealth in direct contradiction to God's instructions. 54. Judges chapter 20 verse 48. Destruction of fellow tribes. After the conflict with the tribe of Benjamin, the Israelites killed and burned the cities of the Benjamites, contradicting God's command to be merciful towards fellow Israelites. 55. 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 23. Establishment of high places. The Israelites built high places and Asherah poles on hills, choosing their form of worship over God's prescribed way, elevating their desires above God's instructions. 56. 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 9. Disobedience in war. Saul spared the Amalekite king Agag and the best livestock, despite God's command to destroy everything, indicating he knew better than God. 57. Ezekiel chapter 36 verses 20 to 23. Blaspheming God's name. The Israelites profaned God's holy name among the nations, causing God's name to be disrespected because of their actions. 58. Isaiah chapter 31 verse 1. Placing trust in foreign alliances. The Israelites sought alliances with Egypt for military help, rather than trusting in God's protection, indicating their preference for human intervention over God's provision. 59. Isaiah chapter 1 verses 11 to 14. Sacrifices without obedience. God rejected the sacrifices of the Israelites because they neglected obedience and justice. They prioritized ritual over real devotion, contrary to God's intention. 60. 2 Kings chapter 16 verses 7 to 8. Paying tribute to foreign gods. King Ahaz sent tribute to the king of Assyria and requested his help, while also adopting foreign gods, indicating a belief in the power of other deities alongside or above the God of Israel. 61. Micah chapter 3 verse 11. Accepting corrupt leaders. Priests and prophets accepted bribes and charged fees for their services, prioritizing wealth over their duty to God's people, disregarding the divine calling to serve selflessly. 62. Matthew chapter 23 verses 23 to 28. The Pharisees, who were descendants of Sarah, often acted with a sense of religious superiority, imposing strict interpretations of the law while neglecting the principles of mercy and justice. They placed their own rules above God's broader intentions of love and compassion. 63. Jeremiah chapter 8 verse 8. How can you say, "We are wise, for we have the law of the Lord," when actually the lying pen of the scribes has handled it falsely? In this verse, Jeremiah criticizes the scribes for corrupting the law of the Lord. He implies that the scribes have deliberately misrepresented or altered the scriptures to suit their own purposes. 64. Isaiah chapter 29 verse 13. The Lord says, "These people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught." Isaiah criticizes the religious leaders for replacing genuine worship and obedience to God with man-made traditions and teachings, which suggests that they have altered or misrepresented God's original intent. 65. Ezekiel chapter 13 verse 9. My hand will be against the prophets who see false visions and utter lying divinations. They will not belong to the council of my people, or be listed in the records of Israel, nor will they enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the sovereign Lord. Ezekiel here condemns false prophets and leaders who spread lies under the guise of divine truth, similar to how scribes might alter scripture for their own benefit. 66. Matthew chapter 23 verse 13. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Jesus criticizes the scribes and Pharisees for their hypocrisy and for leading people away from the true path of God. By manipulating religious laws, they essentially prevent others from accessing God's truth. 67. Matthew chapter 15 verses 3 to 6. Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father or mother with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition." Here, Jesus condemns the teachers of the law for nullifying God's commands through their man-made traditions, showing their belief that they could adjust divine commandments to serve their own interests. 68. Mark chapter 7 verse 13. Thus you nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And you do many things like that. In this verse, Jesus directly accuses the religious leaders of rendering God's word ineffective by replacing it with their own traditions, which highlights their sense of superiority over God's original laws. 69. Luke chapter 11 verse 46. Jesus replied, "And you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. Jesus criticizes the scribes and experts in the law for making God's commands burdensome by adding their own requirements. This shows how they abused their authority, placing themselves above God's original intent. 70. Romans chapter 1 verse 25. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Paul criticizes those who have changed or twisted the truth of God for their own purposes. Although not explicitly directed at scribes, it reflects a general practice of altering divine truth to suit human desires. 71. John chapter 5 verses 39 to 40. You study the scriptures diligently, because you think that in them you have eternal life. These are the very scriptures that testify about me, yet you refuse to come to me to have life. Jesus addresses the religious leaders who prided themselves on their knowledge of Scripture but failed to understand its true message. Their arrogance in believing that they fully understood the Scriptures led them to miss God's plan as revealed in Jesus. Talmud superiority to God. The Talmud is a central text of Rabbinic Judaism and serves as a comprehensive commentary on the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, expanding upon Jewish law, ethics and customs. The Talmud consists of 2 parts: the Mishnah, which is the first major written compilation of Jewish oral traditions, and the Gemara, which is a rabbinical analysis of the Mishnah. The Talmud was formed between the 3rd and 5th centuries CE, with 2 primary versions: the Jerusalem Talmud, compiled in Tiberias and Jerusalem in the 4th century, and the Babylonian Talmud, compiled in Babylonia, completed around the 5th century CE. Here are ways the Talmud differs from and contradicts the laws of God in the Bible, teaching superiority to God by Jewish rabbis. 72. Exodus chapter 21 verse 24. Bible says, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The Talmud, Bava Kama 83b 84a, interprets this law as requiring monetary compensation rather than literal physical retribution. 73. Exodus chapter 21 verse 2. Bible states that a Hebrew slave must be released after 6 years of service. The Talmud, Kiddushin 14b 15a, discusses circumstances under which a slave might choose to stay longer, e.g. through a formal ritual involving ear piercing, and how the Jubilee year affects release. 74. Exodus chapter 20 verse 13. Bible says, you shall not murder. This commandment is universal, and makes no distinction between the killing of Jews or non-Jews. Talmud Sanhedrin 57a, a Jew is not liable if he kills a Gentile, but a Gentile is liable if he kills a Jew. 75. Leviticus chapter 19 verse 11. Bible says, do not steal. Do not lie. Do not deceive one another. The prohibition against lying is directed at all people, with no exemption for interactions with non-Jews. Talmud, Bava Kama 113a, Jews may use lies to circumvent Gentiles. 76. Genesis chapter 1 verse 27. Bible says all people are created equal. So God created mankind in His own image, in the image of God He created them, male and female He created them. All people, including Gentiles, are created in God's image, which implies inherent dignity and value. Talmud Yebamoth 98a, all Gentile children are considered unclean. 77. Job chapter 34 verse 19. Bible says, who shows no partiality to princes and does not favor the rich over the poor, for they are all the work of His hands. This verse highlights God's impartiality, indicating that all people, regardless of status or ethnicity, are equal in God's eyes. Talmud Abodah Zarah 22ab, non-Jews are likened to donkeys. 78. Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 1. Bible says, If you see your fellow Israelites' ox or sheep straying, do not ignore it, but be sure to take it back to its owner. This command to return lost property is part of a broader ethical principle that can be applied universally. Talmud Baba Mezier 24a. If a Jew finds an item lost by a Gentile, it is permitted to keep it. 79. Isaiah chapter 56 verses 6 to 7. Bible says to teach the Torah. And foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord and to be his servants, these I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. This verse speaks of non-Jews seeking God and being welcomed into God's presence, not punished. Talmud Sanhedrin 59a. A non-Jew who studies the Torah deserves death. 80. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 7. Bible says the fate of souls are destined to God, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. This implies that all spirits return to God, without differentiation between Jewish and non-Jewish souls. Talmud Gittin 57a describes the fate of non-Jewish souls in unpleasant terms. 81. Malachi chapter 2 verse 10. Bible says we are all humans from the same Father. Do we not all have one Father? Did not one God create us? This affirms the common humanity of all people, regardless of ethnicity or religion. Talmud Zohar Shemoth 14b. Non-Jews are not considered human. 82. Amos chapter 9 verse 7. Bible says all nations are equal. Are not you Israelites the same to me as the Cushites? Declares the Lord. This verse implies that God does not see Israel as inherently superior to other nations. Talmud Baba Kama 37b. Jews are superior because they are God's chosen people. 83. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 17. Bible says her ways are pleasant ways and all her paths are peace. This highlights the peaceful nature of wisdom, and does not endorse the destruction of other religious texts. Talmud Shabbat 116a. Jews are encouraged to destroy non-Jewish religious texts. 84. Numbers chapter 30 verse 2. Bible says to keep your word. When a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he must not break his word but must do everything he said. This verse stresses the importance of keeping one's word, without specifying to whom the promise is made. Talmud Aruban 21b. A Jew may break a promise made to a non-Jew. 85. Genesis chapter 9 verse 6. Bible says all blood is equal. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. This clearly states that all humans are created in God's image. Talmud Chulun 91b. Only Jews are truly considered men. 86. Genesis chapter 2 verse 7. Bible says the source of souls are from God. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. This verse indicates that all human beings have the same divine source of life. Talmud Midrash Talpioth 225. Non-Jewish souls come from impure sources. 87. Micah chapter 6 verse 8. Bible teaches to be moral. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. This moral requirement applies universally to all people. Talmud Sota 35b. Non-Jews do not have the same moral expectations as Jews. 88. Isaiah chapter 49 verse 6. Bible teaches to serve Gentiles. It is too small a thing for you to be my servant to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. This verse indicates that Israel's role is to serve as a light to the nations, not the other way around. Talmud Yalkut 245c. Non-Jews were created to serve Jews. 89. Proverbs chapter 12 verse 22. Bible says, to be honest, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. God's condemnation of lying applies to all circumstances, not just interactions within the Jewish community. Talmud Nedarim 23b. A Jew is permitted to lie to a Gentile. 90. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 7. Bible teaches to love non-Jewish people also. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. This verse encourages positive engagement and prayer for the well-being of the broader society, not disdain. Talmud Menashe 43b. Jews are commanded to show disdain for non-Jewish customs. 91. Acts chapter 17 verse 26. Bible teaches that all people are equal. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. This verse suggests that all nations are equally created by God, with no inherent superiority. Talmud, Midrash Shmuel 103 inches. Non-Jews are referred to as inferior beings. 92. Leviticus chapter 19 verse 34. Bible teaches to treat people equally. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Talmud Yebamoth 109b. A non-Jew is not afforded the same rights as a Jew and does not need to be treated equally. 93. Exodus chapter 23 verse 5. Bible says to help people in need. If you see the donkey of someone who hates you fallen under its load, do not leave it there, be sure you help them with it. Encourages helping even an enemy, regardless of who they are. Talmud Baba Kama 113b. Advises against aiding Gentiles in certain situations, reflecting a different attitude from the Bible's inclusive ethic. 94. Proverbs chapter 25 verse 21. Bible teaches to have compassion. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. Instructs kindness even towards enemies. Talmud Abodah Zara 20a. Advises against providing assistance to non-Jews, which contrasts with the Bible's message of compassion. 95. Deuteronomy chapter 10 verse 18. Bible says to honor a foreign widow. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. The Bible speaks of caring for all vulnerable people, including foreigners. Talmud Kethuboth 3b suggests only Jewish widows are entitled to certain protections, which limits the biblical view of inclusivity. Superiority in Zionist Israeli laws. 96. Nation-State Law 2018 declares Israel the nation-state of the Jewish people, with self-determination being exclusive to Jews. 97. Law of Return allows Jews anywhere in the world to immigrate to Israel, while Palestinians who were displaced are not permitted to return. 98. Citizenship Law makes it more difficult for Palestinians to acquire Israeli citizenship. 99. Property Law allows Jews to reclaim property from PRE 1948, while Palestinians are denied similar rights. 100. Access to land. 93% of Israeli land is controlled by the Israel Land Authority, which prioritizes Jewish settlement. 101. Planning and Building Law discriminates against non-Jews in land development and permits. 102. Military law versus civil law Palestinians in the West Bank are subject to military law, while Jewish settlers are subject to civil law. 103. Restriction of movement. Jews have full access to roads and resources, while Palestinians face numerous checkpoints and travel restrictions. 104. Educational disparities. Jewish schools receive significantly more funding than Arab schools. 105. National priority areas. Designated to favor Jewish communities, excluding many Arab areas from development benefits. 106. Marriage law. Only religious marriages are recognized, and interfaith marriages are highly restricted. 107. Home demolition policy. Homes of Palestinians are often demolished as punitive measures, while similar actions are not taken against Jewish settlers. 108. Judicial system. Zionist courts often give preferential treatment to Jewish citizens over non-Jews. 109. Voting rights in the West Bank. Jewish settlers can vote in Zionist elections, while Palestinians in the same area cannot. 110. Access to water. Palestinian communities have restricted access to water, whereas Jewish settlements have plentiful supplies. 111. Military draft. Jewish citizens are required to serve, while Arab citizens are exempt, contributing to societal segregation. 112. Municipal funding. Jewish municipalities receive significantly more state funding than Arab ones. 113. Arabic language status. The nation-state law downgraded Arabic from an official language. 114. Land confiscation. The state can confiscate Palestinian land for public purposes, often defined to benefit Jewish settlements. 115. Tax benefits. Jewish settlements receive various tax benefits, while Palestinian areas are denied similar financial support. 116. Third Temple. Zionists claim the Third Temple has not been rebuilt, and on a yearly basis, try to weaken the foundations of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, which are the current Third Temple. Archaeological excavations, underground tunneling and construction projects near the Temple Mount. UNESCO and other international bodies have criticized some of these activities, pointing to the potential risk of destabilizing the foundations of sacred structures above. The tunnels running near or beneath the Western Wall are said to be weakening the overall foundations of the site. The Western Wall tunnel runs along the western side of the Temple Mount and has been expanded in recent years. Muslim authorities, including the Jordanian Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs and the Waqf, the Islamic religious trust that administers the site, have repeatedly voiced concerns that the expansion of the Western Wall tunnel is jeopardizing the foundations of the masjid. This attempted destruction of God's temple supersedes the biblical prophecy that God will rebuild the temple through the descendants of Abraham, Ishmael. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 7, All Kedar's flocks will be gathered to you, the rams of Nebaioth will serve you, they will be accepted as offerings on my altar, and I will adorn my glorious temple. Kedar and Nebaioth are names of Ishmael's sons, Genesis chapter 25 verse 13. They represent the descendants of Ishmael, the forefathers of many Arab tribes. Traditionally, offerings at the altar were symbolic of devotion, atonement and submission to God. These offerings being accepted, signifies that God is pleased with the spiritual dedication of these people. I will adorn my glorious temple. The verse concludes with God adorning his glorious temple, which represents a beautification or restoration of his dwelling place. The use of the word adorn suggests that the temple is being enhanced or renewed through the contributions and devotion of the people mentioned. The third temple is often seen in prophecy as the ultimate dwelling place of God, a place that symbolizes His presence among His people. Isaiah chapter 56 verse 7 reinforces this by stating, "My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations." The prophecy of Isaiah chapter 60 verse 7 suggests that the descendants of Ishmael will be part of this spiritual restoration, thereby contributing to the fulfillment of this vision of the third temple as a house for all nations. Based on biblical geography, the temple referenced in Isaiah chapter 60 verse 7 is generally understood to be the temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, also referred to as Mount Zion. This is the traditional site of both the first and second temples, and is the same location where the third temple has been rebuilt by the descendants of Ishmael. Prophesied anti-Semitism for prophetic pride. Zionist terrorism doesn't only foster hate and revenge worldwide, it also incurs God's ordained antisemitism. The Bible describes that antisemitism is a consequence of Jewish superiority to God. The Bible contains several passages that warn the Israelites of earning the wrath of God for disobedience. According to AI, the Bible documents a ratio of 100:1 the times the descendants of Isaac were divinely punished, received antisemitism, compared to the descendants of Ishmael. 1. Numbers chapter 14 verses 33-34. Wilderness wanderings. The Israelites were sentenced to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, due to their lack of faith when they refused to enter the promised land. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness, until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. 2. Numbers chapter 16 verses 31-35. Korah's rebellion. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. As punishment, the ground opened up and swallowed them along with their families, and 250 men who offered incense were consumed by fire. And fire came out from the Lord, and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. 3. Exodus chapter 32 verses 27-28. Golden Calf Incident. After Moses descended from Mount Sinai and found the people worshipping the golden calf, about 3,000 men were killed by the Levites in punishment. He said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. 4. 2 Kings chapter 17 verses 6-23. Punishment of the northern kingdom, Israel. The northern kingdom, led by Ephraim, was conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BCE, due to persistent idolatry and disobedience. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile in Assyria, and they are still there. 5. 2 Chronicles chapter 36 verses 15-17. Babylonian exile of Judah. Due to repeated disobedience and idolatry, the southern kingdom of Judah was conquered by Babylon in 586 BCE, and the people were exiled. He brought up against them the king of the Babylonians, who killed their young men with the sword in the sanctuary, and did not spare young men or young women, the elderly or the infirm. 6. Jeremiah chapter 49 verse 5. I will bring terror on you from all those around you, declares the Lord Almighty. Every one of you will be driven away, and no one will gather the fugitives. Here, God warns that they will be driven away and left without refuge, indicating a forced displacement. 7. Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 17. Israel is a scattered flock that lions have chased away. The first to devour them was the king of Assyria. The last to crush their bones was Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. This verse speaks of Israel as a scattered flock, having been pursued and attacked and facing antisemitism by various enemies, symbolizing their being chased away due to divine judgment. 8. Leviticus chapter 26 verse 36. As for those of you who are left, I will make their hearts so fearful in the lands of their enemies that the sound of a windblown leaf will put them to flight. They will run as though fleeing from the sword, and they will fall even though no one is pursuing them. This verse speaks of fear and running away, implying that the Israelites would be so afraid that they would flee even without being chased. This fear is what founded the current secular Zionist state of Israel, founded on trying again to be superior to God and again spurring wrath with a recent 300% increase in Jews leaving Israel and Netanyahu, claiming to be attacked from 7 sides as foretold in the Bible. 9. Hosea chapter 9 verse 17. My God will reject them because they have not obeyed him. They will be wanderers among the nations. This verse suggests that the Israelites will be rejected by God and forced to wander, indicating being driven out from stability. 10. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 25. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction but flee from them in 7, and you will become a thing of horror to all the kingdoms on earth. This verse indicates that the Israelites will be chased away by their enemies, forced to flee in different directions. 11. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 63. Just as it pleased the Lord to make you prosper and increase in number, so it will please him to ruin and destroy you. You will be uprooted from the land you are entering to possess. The Israelites are warned that they will be uprooted from their land as a consequence of disobedience. 12. Hosea chapter 7 verse 13. Woe to them because they have strayed from me. Destruction to them because they have rebelled against me. I long to redeem them, but they speak about me falsely. This verse speaks of the destruction and dispersal of the Israelites as a consequence of their rebellion. 13. Leviticus chapter 26 verse 33. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste, and your cities will lie in ruins. 14. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 27. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which the Lord will drive you. 15. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 64. Then the Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end of the earth to the other. 16. Deuteronomy chapter 29 verse 28. In furious anger and in great wrath the Lord uprooted them from their land and thrust them into another land, as it is now. 17. Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 1. When all these blessings and curses I have set before you come on you, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations. 18. 1 Kings chapter 9 verse 7. Then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. 19. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 23. So the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile in Assyria, and they are still there. 20. 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 20. Then I will uproot Israel from my land, which I have given them, and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. 21. Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 8. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. 22. Psalm chapter 106 verse 27. Make their descendants fall among the nations and scatter them throughout the lands. 23. Jeremiah chapter 9 verse 16. I will scatter them among nations that neither they nor their ancestors have known. 24. Jeremiah chapter 13 verse 24. I will scatter you like chaff driven by the desert wind. 25. Jeremiah chapter 18 verse 17. Like a wind from the east, I will scatter them before their enemies. 26. Jeremiah chapter 24 verse 9. I will make them abhorrent, and an offense to all the kingdoms of the earth. 27. Ezekiel chapter 5 verse 10. Therefore in your midst parents will eat their children, and children will eat their parents. I will inflict punishment on you, and will scatter all your survivors to the winds. 28. Ezekiel chapter 12 verse 15. They will know that I am the Lord, when I disperse them among the nations and scatter them through the countries. 29. Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 23. Also with uplifted hand I swore to them in the wilderness, that I would disperse them among the nations and scatter them through the countries. 30. Zechariah chapter 7 verse 14. I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations, where they were strangers. Historical response to Jewish superiority. 1. Adolf Hitler. In Mein Kampf Volume 1 Chapter 11 Nation and Race, Hitler states, Hence today, I believe that I am acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. By defending myself against the Jew, I am fighting for the work of the Lord. Hitler believed he was avenging Jesus for the Jewish superiority, in presumably killing Christ. 2. Martin Luther. 1483–1546, the Protestant Reformation leader wrote extensively against Jews in his pamphlet, On the Jews and Their Lies, in which he accused them of rejecting and defying God, and saw their refusal to convert as a sign of their arrogance and superiority to God. 3. Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. 15th century, the Spanish monarchs issued the Alhambra Decree in 1492, expelling Jews from Spain. They considered Jews as being superior to God's true faith, rejecting Christianity, which led to their expulsion. 4. Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. 1796–1855, Nicholas I viewed the Jews as a threat to Russian orthodoxy, and considered their refusal to convert to Christianity as an act of defiance against God. His anti-Semitic policies reflected this belief. 5. Edward I of England. 1239–1307, Edward I expelled the Jews from England in 1290, largely because they were perceived as resisting conversion to Christianity and maintaining a separate, superior status. 6. Pope Innocent III. 1160–61–1216, he accused the Jews of being stubborn in their refusal to accept Jesus as the Messiah, and thought their ongoing presence was a sign of superiority to God's will, which fueled official church policy against Jews. 7. Tomás de Torquemada. 1420–1498, the Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition, Torquemada viewed Jews as defiant to God's new covenant through Christ, and saw their continued existence as undermining Christian theology, which he believed showed superiority to God's law. 8. Bogdan Khmelnytsky. 1595–1657, the leader of the Cossack uprising against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1648, targeted Jews, partly due to a perception that Jews were allied with the nobility and refused to convert, reflecting their self-perceived superiority. 9. Voltaire. 1694–1778, the French Enlightenment philosopher was critical of the Jews for their religious exclusivity, and what he perceived as a claim to be a chosen people, superior to others, which he often used as an argument in his critiques. 10. King Ferdinand II of Austria. 1578–1637, the Holy Roman Emperor saw the Jews as an impediment to Catholic unity, and believed their refusal to embrace Christianity indicated a sense of superiority to God. 11. Catherine the Great. 1729–1796. During her reign she confined Jews to the Pale of Settlement, and viewed them as an alien group that refused to assimilate, with beliefs that signified defiance to the divine order. 12. Philippe Pétain. 1856–1951, the head of Vichy France during World War II, considered Jews as inherently disloyal and unable to be true members of French society, which stemmed from their perceived superiority and separation based on religious grounds. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte. 1769–1821, initially favorable to Jews, Napoleon eventually viewed them as a people who held themselves aloof due to their religious exclusivity, implying a superior attitude toward others. 14. Frederick William II of Prussia. 1744–1797, he enacted anti-Jewish policies, believing that Jews were resistant to divine authority in Christianity and considered themselves a special people, which undermined the Christian faith. 15. Pope Paul IV. 1476–1559, he established the Roman ghetto and enforced harsh restrictions, considering Jews as rejecting God's new covenant, and therefore acting superior to God's plan of salvation through Christ. 16. Joseph Stalin. 1878–1953, although primarily motivated by political concerns, Stalin viewed Jews as inherently disloyal, and perceived their religious traditions as placing them above others, contributing to his campaign against cosmopolitans. 17. John Chrysostom. Circa 349–407, the early Church Father wrote anti-Jewish homilies, accusing Jews of pride and arrogance for refusing to accept Jesus, thus maintaining a superior attitude over Christians. 18. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. 1918–2008, the Russian writer criticized Jews in 200 Years Together for maintaining a sense of separateness and superiority, which he believed contributed to their persecution. 19. Henry II of France. 1519–1559, Henry II implemented measures to restrict Jewish activities, influenced by a belief that Jews refused to submit to divine authority through Christ, thus acting with a sense of superiority. 20. Hermann Göring. 1893–1946, one of Hitler's top officials, Göring justified anti-Semitic policies by stating that Jews considered themselves above God's law, and acted in a way that set them apart as superior. Pride has deadly consequences from both humans and God. Zionists and Nazis have been equally documented for prideful inequality. Chapter 4: Greedy Government. The sin of greed is insidious. It can take root in the human spirit, driving us to accumulate more than we need, to the detriment of others. Zionism, once conceived as a movement for Jewish safety and dignity, has transformed over the decades into a project driven by relentless expansion and territorial greed. This unyielding desire for more land, more resources, and more control has manifested itself in policies that disregard the rights of others and stand in defiance of God's moral commandments. Greed has steered Zionism away from its original intention of security and community towards a hunger for material possession, an appetite that can never be satisfied. The land as a promise. The pursuit of land is an integral part of the Zionist ideology. However, in its present form, Zionism has twisted the understanding of God's promise to Abraham into a justification for relentless territorial expansion. God's covenant with Abraham was not a blank check for limitless acquisition. The promise was conditional, dependent on righteousness, obedience, and adherence to divine law. In Leviticus chapter 26 verses 3 to 46, God speaks clearly of the conditions that must be fulfilled for his blessings to be bestowed. If you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, I will send you rain in its season, and the ground will yield its crops and the trees their fruit. Yet, Zionist leaders have largely disregarded these conditions, proceeding instead as though the land of Greater Israel belongs to them unconditionally, regardless of the moral and ethical standards set forth by God. The expansionist policies that have driven Zionism are rooted in a greed for territory, a desire that has caused immense suffering. The displacement of Palestinians, the construction of settlements in the West Bank, and the annexation of land are all manifestations of this avarice. In Deuteronomy chapter 30 verses 15 to 18, God offers a choice between life and prosperity or death and destruction. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. By prioritizing land acquisition over moral obligations, Zionism has chosen a path of destruction, one that defies God's commandments and places material wealth above spiritual well-being. Expansionist policies. The greed of Zionism is most evident in its expansionist policies. When the State of Israel was established in 1948, the United Nations partition plan allocated specific territories for a Jewish state and an Arab state. However, from the very beginning, the desire for more land pushed Zionist leaders to expand beyond these borders, taking over territories that were meant to belong to the Palestinian people. The Six-Day War of 1967 marked a turning point in Israel's territorial ambitions. Under the guise of self-defense, Israel seized control of the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights and East Jerusalem, territories that were not included in the original partition plan. These acquisitions were justified as necessary for the security of the state, but the continued occupation and settlement construction reveal a deeper motivation rooted in greed. The settlement enterprise in the West Bank in particular exemplifies how the Zionist movement has prioritized land over justice. Despite numerous United Nations resolutions condemning these settlements as illegal under international law, Israel has continued to expand them, driven by the desire to possess and control as much territory as possible. This expansionist drive is also reflected in Zionist policies that aim to alter the demographics of Jerusalem. The construction of settlements around East Jerusalem, the revocation of residency rights for Palestinians, and the restrictions on building permits for non-Jews are all part of a strategy to solidify control over the city. The greed for land has led to policies that systematically marginalize and dispossess the Muslim population, disregarding their rights and humanity in the pursuit of expansion. The moral cost of greed. The Bible speaks often of the dangers of greed and the moral imperative to treat others with justice and compassion. In Deuteronomy chapter 10 verses 17 to 19, God commands the Israelites to show kindness to strangers. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. The treatment of the Palestinian people stands in stark contrast to these divine instructions. Instead of compassion, they have been met with dispossession and displacement, victims of a greedy pursuit for land that disregards the ethical teachings of the Torah. Yet, the policies implemented by Zionist leaders reflect a selective reading of Scripture, one that focuses solely on the promise of land, while ignoring the ethical and moral obligations that accompany it. This selective interpretation is a manifestation of greed, a desire to take without fulfilling the responsibilities that come with God's blessings. The consequences of greed. The consequences of this greed have been devastating, not only for the Palestinian people, but also for the Jewish community. The relentless pursuit of land has led to decades of conflict, violence, and insecurity. Instead of creating a safe haven for Jews, Zionism's greed has perpetuated a cycle of suffering and instability. The Bible warns of the dangers of greed and the consequences that come from disregarding God's commandments. In Ezekiel chapter 33 verses 24 to 26, God speaks to the people of Israel, saying, "You rely on your sword, you do detestable things, and each of you defiles his neighbor's wife. Should you then possess the land?" The message is clear: possession of the land is contingent upon righteousness. Greed, violence, and injustice are not the qualities that will lead to divine blessings. The greed that drives Zionism has also had a corrosive effect on the moral fabric of Zionist society. The pursuit of land has led to the militarization of society, the normalization of violence, and the dehumanization of Palestinians. This moral decay is a direct consequence of prioritizing material gain over spiritual and ethical values. In Proverbs chapter 15 verse 27 it is written, "The greedy bring ruin to their households, but the one who hates bribes will live." The greed for land has brought ruin to both Palestinian and Jewish households, perpetuating a cycle of violence and insecurity that benefits no one. To find true safety and security, the Jewish people must reject the sin of greed and return to the covenant, a covenant that is based on justice, compassion, and obedience to God. The pursuit of land must be replaced with the pursuit of righteousness, and the desire for material possession must be replaced with a desire to fulfill God's moral commandments. Only then can the Jewish people find the peace and security they seek, not through the accumulation of land, but through the fulfillment of God's will. Chapter 5: Ring around the wrath. The sin of wrath has burned like an unquenchable fire throughout the history of Zionism, creating a vicious cycle of retaliation that has consumed both Zionists and Arabs in its destructive path. This wrath, driven by years of fear, insecurity, and historical trauma, has been used as a justification for retaliatory violence that does not distinguish between combatants and civilians, between the innocent and those at fault. The disproportionate responses, the ever-escalating acts of revenge, and the collective punishment have made the land once promised as a refuge into one of the most unstable places in the world. Wrath has become a poisoned chalice for those who drink from it, perpetuating cycles of violence that have only deepened the wounds of both sides. The doctrine of disproportionate force. Throughout the history of the Zionist-Arab conflict, wrath has taken shape in the form of overwhelming military retaliation, force that is often grossly disproportionate to the perceived offense. The Zionist principle of deterrence has evolved into an ideology that justifies massive retaliation against even the smallest provocations. This doctrine, called the Dahir Doctrine, after the destruction of a neighborhood in Beirut during the 2006 Lebanon War, embraces overwhelming force as a means of deterrence. This approach is founded on the belief that only through crushing, overwhelming retaliation can Israel ensure its security and maintain its sovereignty. Yet, this use of excessive force has come at a profound moral cost. Time and again, disproportionate military responses have resulted in the deaths of innocent civilians, many of them women and children, who have paid the price for the wrath unleashed by those in power, inspiring new generations of resistance fighters. In Gaza, Lebanon, and across the occupied Palestinian territories, entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble in response to acts of aggression that, while condemnable, did not warrant such devastating retribution. The sin of wrath has transformed the concept of justice into a rationale for destruction, leading to suffering that is neither justified nor righteous. The Bible provides clear guidance on the matter of justice and retribution. In Exodus chapter 21 verses 23 to 24 it is written, But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. This passage is often misunderstood as a call for retribution, yet its true intention is proportional justice, a principle that Zionism has failed to uphold. Instead, Roth has dictated that the response to every injury must be overwhelming, that every perceived slight must be answered with overwhelming force. This departure from the biblical principle of justice has created a cycle of violence that has only deepened the divisions between Jews and Muslims, making reconciliation and peace all the more elusive. Wrath begets wrath, the endless cycle of retaliation. The sin of wrath has not only poisoned the actions of Zionist leaders, but has also created a culture of retaliation that has seeped into the consciousness of both Zionists and Arabs. Wrath is a force that, once unleashed, cannot be easily controlled. The Zionist occupation, the construction of settlements, the genocide in Gaza, all of these actions have been justified as responses to the perceived wrath of the other side. In response, the Arab people have also been consumed by wrath, resorting to violence, resistance, and sometimes acts of terror in their struggle against the occupation. Each act of retaliation, whether Zionist or Arab, becomes another link in the unbreakable chain of violence that has defined the region for decades. The Gospel of Matthew offers a stark warning about the dangers of wrath. In Matthew chapter 26 verse 52, Jesus says, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." This profound warning speaks directly to the futility of wrath, the idea that violence begets violence, and that those who choose the path of the sword will ultimately be consumed by it. Yet, in the name of security, Zionism has embraced the sword, and has become trapped in a cycle of violence that has brought neither peace nor safety. Instead of a haven for Jews, Israel has become a land of fear, where the constant threat of retaliation and violence looms over both Zionists and Palestinians. The wrath that has fueled the Zionist-Arab conflict has not only failed to bring about the security that Zionism promised, but has also ensured that the region remains in a state of perpetual conflict. Collective punishment, the wrath against the innocent. One of the most troubling manifestations of wrath in the Zionist approach to security has been the use of collective punishment. When a single act of aggression occurs, whether it is a rocket fired from Gaza or an attack carried out by an individual, the response is often directed not just at those responsible, but at entire communities. Homes are demolished, fields are razed, and entire neighborhoods are bombarded as a means of retribution. This wrath is not confined to those who committed the offense, it is meted out indiscriminately, punishing men, women, and children alike. In Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 16, God makes clear his opposition to collective punishment. Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents, each will die for their own sin. The principle here is unmistakable. Justice must be individual, not collective. Yet, Zionist policies have consistently violated this principle, subjecting entire communities to the consequences of actions for which they bear no responsibility. The wrath unleashed against the innocent is not justice, it is vengeance, and it stands in direct contradiction to the teachings of God. The consequences of wrath. The consequences of wrath are evident in the instability and insecurity that continue to plague both Zionists and Arabs. Wrath has not brought peace, it has brought fear, hatred, and mistrust. For every act of retaliation there is a response, and for every response there is more retaliation. This cycle has no end, and it has left both communities scarred, each seeing the other not as fellow children of Abraham but as enemies to be feared and fought. In the book of Proverbs there is a powerful verse that speaks to the danger of wrath. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Proverbs chapter 15 verse 1. Zionism, in its wrath, has chosen the path of the harsh word, the heavy hand, and the disproportionate response. Rather than seeking reconciliation, Zionist leaders have pursued policies that inflame tensions and deepen wounds. Instead of seeking security through peace, they have sought it through dominance and aggression, believing that only through overwhelming force can they ensure the survival of the state. Yet this wrath has not brought security. It has only ensured that Israel remains a place of fear and instability, where neither Jews nor Arabs can truly be safe. A call to reject wrath and embrace peace. The sin of wrath has poisoned the dream of a safe haven for Jews, transforming it into a nightmare of violence and instability. This wrath has not only deepened the suffering of the Palestinian people, but has also trapped the Jewish people in a cycle of violence that has robbed them of the peace they so desperately seek. The way forward requires a rejection of wrath and a return to the principles of justice, compassion and proportionality that are at the heart of God's commandments. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus teaches, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Matthew chapter 5 verse 9. To find true safety and security, the Jewish people must embrace the path of peace, seeking reconciliation with their Arab neighbors, rejecting the sin of wrath and working to heal the wounds that have been inflicted on both sides. Only by turning away from the poisoned chalice of wrath can the Jewish people find the refuge they seek. Only by rejecting vengeance and embracing justice can they create a society that is not defined by fear and violence, but by peace and coexistence. The path of wrath is a path of destruction, the path of peace is the path of God. It is time for Zionism to choose which path it will follow. Chapter 6. Levi Lust. Lust is not only a sin of the body, it is a sin of the heart, an unchecked desire that leads to the corruption of the soul. In the context of Zionism, lust is manifested not in the pursuit of pleasure, but in the unchecked yearning for power. The lust to dominate, to control, to impose will upon the land and its people. This sinful lust has transformed a once noble aspiration for safety into an insatiable craving for supremacy, turning the dream of a Jewish homeland into a nightmare for those who stand in its path. The sin of lust, in the form of power and control, has permeated the ideology and practice of Zionism. What began as a desire for a haven, a refuge for the Jewish people from persecution, has become an unyielding quest for domination, a drive to subjugate the land and the people within it, to shape reality in accordance with an expansionist and exclusionary vision. This unchecked desire has led to occupation, dispossession, and a state of perpetual conflict, transforming Israel into a land where neither Jews nor Arabs can truly find peace. The lust for control, occupation and subjugation. The most apparent manifestation of Zionism's lust is the policy of occupation, a relentless expansion that seeks to claim and control every inch of the land deemed part of Greater Israel. This lust for control has led to policies that deny millions of Arabs their basic human rights, trapping them in a system of checkpoints, barriers and discriminatory laws that reduce them to mere obstacles in the path of the Zionist dream. In the West Bank, the expansion of Zionist settlements, built in defiance of international law and the Geneva Conventions, serves as a testament to the insatiable lust for land. These settlements are not merely expressions of Jewish presence, they are the physical manifestations of a desire to dominate, to reshape the landscape in a manner that makes coexistence impossible. The construction of settlements, the seizure of Palestinian homes, the establishment of Zionists-only roads, all these actions reflect a lust for power that seeks to impose control over every aspect of life, reducing the Arab inhabitants to mere subjects under an unyielding regime. The Bible offers clear guidance on how to treat others, particularly those who are strangers or outsiders in the land. In Leviticus chapter 19 verses 33 to 34, God commands, "When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt." This commandment, rooted in the shared experience of suffering and exile, calls upon the Jewish people to treat others with compassion, to love the stranger as they would love themselves. Yet, the lust for power that drives Zionism has led to the complete disregard of this divine mandate, turning a quest for safety into an exercise in domination and control. The policies enacted in the name of Zionism have consistently demonstrated a lust for domination, a desire to subjugate rather than coexist. Muslims living in the occupied territories are subjected to a different set of laws than their Jewish neighbors, facing military rule while Jewish settlers enjoy civil rights and privileges. The policies of home demolitions, land confiscation, and the revocation of residency rights are all aimed at subjugating the Arab population, reducing them to a state of dependency and insecurity that serves to further the Zionist agenda. In Micah chapter 2 verse 2, the prophet warns against the greed and lust for power that leads to the oppression of others. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud people of their homes, they rob them of their inheritance. This verse speaks directly to the policies of land confiscation and settlement expansion that have defined Zionist practices in the occupied territories. The lust for power has led to the seizure of land, the destruction of homes, and the displacement of families, all in the name of securing control over the land. This behavior, condemned by the prophet Micah, is a direct affront to the values of justice and righteousness that lie at the heart of the Jewish faith. The wall of lust, barriers to peace. The construction of the separation wall, often called the apartheid wall by its critics, stands as a physical embodiment of Zionism's lust for control. The wall, which cuts through Palestinian towns and villages, separating families from their land, schools, and places of work, is a stark reminder of the lengths to which Zionism will go to impose its will upon the land. The wall is not just a barrier of concrete and steel, it is a manifestation of the desire to dominate, to control every aspect of life in the occupied territories, to impose a reality in which one people's freedom is sacrificed for another's illusion of security. The moral cost of lust, a people corrupted by power. The lust for power that has driven Zionism has not only oppressed the Muslim population, but has also corrupted the moral fabric of the Jewish people. The policies of occupation and subjugation, the daily humiliations inflicted upon the Muslim population, have dehumanized both the oppressor and the oppressed. The lust for control has led to a militarized society, where the value of human life is measured not by its inherent dignity, but by its utility in the service of the state. Soldiers, many of them young men and women, are placed in positions where they must enforce policies that strip others of their rights and dignity, and in doing so, they too are stripped of their own humanity. The Gospel of Matthew offers a powerful reminder of the dangers of lust and the corrupting influence of power. In Matthew chapter 16 verse 26, Jesus asks, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul?" The pursuit of power, the desire to dominate and control, may bring temporary gains, land security, a sense of dominance, but at what cost? The soul of the nation, the moral integrity of the people, is sacrificed in the process. The lust for power has led to a situation where the Jewish people, once persecuted and oppressed, have become the oppressors, inflicting upon others the very suffering they once sought to escape. A call to repentance, rejecting the sin of lust. The sin of lust, in the form of an insatiable desire for power and control, has transformed Zionism from a movement for refuge into a force of domination. This lust has led to the occupation and subjugation of millions, the denial of basic rights, and the construction of barriers that divide not only the land, but also the hearts of its people. The policies driven by this lust have brought neither security nor peace. Instead, they have ensured that the land remains a place of fear, resentment, and perpetual conflict. The way forward requires a rejection of the lust for power, and a return to the values of justice, compassion, and humility that are at the core of the Jewish faith. In Isaiah chapter 1 verse 17, the prophet calls upon the people to learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. This call to justice, to the defense of the oppressed, stands in stark contrast to the policies of domination and control that have defined Zionism. To find true safety and security, the Jewish people must reject the sin of lust and embrace a vision of the land that is based on justice, equality, and coexistence. The path of lust is a path of destruction. It is a path that leads not to safety but to perpetual death. The only way to find true refuge, to create a land where Jews can be safe, is to reject the desire for domination and to embrace the principles of justice and compassion that lie at the heart of God's commandments. Only by rejecting the sin of lust and embracing the values of humility and righteousness can the Jewish people find the peace they seek and create a future where all the inhabitants of the land can live in harmony. Chapter 7: Gluttony against the Goy. Gluttony, in its most common form, is the overindulgence in food and drink. But in a broader, more metaphorical sense, gluttony is the insatiable appetite for excess, a craving that knows no bounds and disregards the consequences. In the context of Zionism, gluttony manifests as an overwhelming hunger for military power, a voracious pursuit of strength and influence, regardless of the price paid in human lives and peace. This unchecked appetite for militarization has defined Israel's approach to security, placing arms over understanding, force versus dialogue, power over reconciliation. Israel's overdependence on military might, the accumulation of weapons, the sprawling defense budget, and the constant pursuit of military superiority, is gluttonous in nature. This relentless focus has come at the expense of a genuine and sustained effort toward peace, leaving Jews and Arabs alike in a cycle of perpetual insecurity. Zionism's gluttonous approach to power, fueled by the perceived need for security, has ultimately led to a land mired in endless conflict, rather than the sanctuary envisioned by its founders. Feasting on military might. Israel's defense spending is nearly tied for first place as the highest per capita in the world, tied with Armenia, reveals the gluttonous hunger for military might that has characterized Zionism's approach to security. In 2023, Israel allocated approximately $23 billion to its defense budget, representing nearly 5.2% of its GDP, a figure that dwarfs the military expenditures of nearly all nations. This massive outlay reflects a belief that security can only be achieved through force, that safety lies in the barrel of a gun rather than in the hearts and minds of people. The relentless pursuit of military superiority, whether through cutting-edge technology, advanced missile defense systems, or nuclear capabilities, has become an addiction, a feast that Zionism cannot seem to end. This gluttony for military power has been exemplified by Israel's acquisition of increasingly sophisticated weapons systems. The Iron Dome, the David's Sling, and the Arrow defense systems are all manifestations of a military-industrial complex that is constantly fed by an insatiable hunger for protection. But while these systems have provided a sense of security, they have also perpetuated a cycle of fear and escalation, encouraging enemies to develop their own capabilities in response. The Bible, however, teaches us that true security comes not from weapons of war, but from faith, righteousness, and the pursuit of justice. In Psalm chapter 20 verse 7, the psalmist writes, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." This verse underscores the futility of placing trust in military might, instead of in God's protection and justice. Yet, the Zionist movement, consumed by its gluttony for military power, has ignored this wisdom, preferring instead to place its faith in an ever-growing arsenal of weapons. The result has been a state that is heavily armed yet deeply insecure, a nation that has more weapons than it can use, but lacks the true security that comes from peace. A perpetual feast. This gluttonous hunger for military power extends beyond the acquisition of weapons. It includes the relentless pursuit of international alliances and influence. Israel has for decades sought to maintain its military edge through close alliances with major powers, most notably the United States. This relationship, while providing Israel with financial aid, weapons and political backing, has also required a gluttonous approach to influence, a willingness to pressure, persuade and even manipulate international actors to ensure unwavering support. The Zionist lobby in the United States is one of the most powerful in Washington, wielding influence over foreign policy decisions that impact the entire region. The pursuit of international support, often through political pressure, reflects a gluttony for power and influence that has come at the cost of moral integrity and ethical governance. The insatiable appetite for political leverage, the relentless desire to ensure that no dissenting voice can challenge Israel's policies, has led to a situation where diplomacy is drowned out by demands and negotiation is replaced by pressure tactics. In Proverbs chapter 21 verse 6 it is written, "A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare." The relentless pursuit of political influence, whether through lobbying, manipulation, or exerting pressure, cannot bring lasting security or respect. Instead, it creates resentment and mistrust, leading to an environment where peace becomes even more elusive. Israel's pursuit of international influence, driven by gluttony, has undermined its moral standing and has made genuine dialogue with its neighbors nearly impossible. The cost of gluttony. The gluttony for military power and political influence has come at an enormous cost, not just in terms of financial resources, but in terms of the moral and social fabric of Zionist society. The focus on militarization has overshadowed efforts to foster dialogue, build bridges, and create an environment conducive to peace. The pursuit of an ever-expanding military arsenal, the unquenchable thirst for security at the expense of justice, has made it difficult for Israel to be seen as a partner for peace by its neighbors. In Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4, the prophet offers a vision of a world where people will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. This vision of a world without conflict, a world where nations seek peace rather than war, stands in stark contrast to the reality that has unfolded under Zionism. Rather than beating swords into plowshares, Israel has forged more swords, built more walls and sown seeds of mistrust and resentment. The gluttonous focus on militarization has also affected Zionist society itself, leading to the glorification of the military and the normalization of conflict. Young men and women are conscripted into service, trained to see the world through the lens of enemies and threats, rather than opportunities for peace and reconciliation. The pursuit of military power has become a way of life, a feast that consumes the energies, resources, and hopes of the nation. It has made peace seem unattainable, a distant dream overshadowed by the harsh reality of occupation, checkpoints, and daily confrontations. The moral decay of gluttony. The gluttony for power and control has also led to moral decay, both within Israel and in its interactions with the broader world. The desire to dominate, to have more weapons, more allies, more influence, has led to actions that contradict the teachings of the Jewish faith. The Bible calls for justice, compassion, and humility, values that have been overshadowed by the desire for control. In Jeremiah chapter 22 verse 13 it is written, "Woe to him who builds his house by unrighteousness and his upper rooms by injustice." The expansion of settlements, the policies of occupation, and the treatment of the Arab population, all driven by the desire for control, stand in direct contradiction to these values. The gluttonous accumulation of power has created a society where the line between right and wrong is blurred by the demands of security. The morality of actions is judged not by their adherence to divine principles, but by their effectiveness in achieving military or political goals. The result is a society that has lost sight of the true purpose of the Zionist dream, a society that, in its pursuit of safety, has created a reality of conflict, injustice, and fear. Conclusion: the burning Bushido. In the aftermath of shared suffering, two distinct paths emerged, one of redemption, forgiveness, and constructive development, and another, marred by victimhood, a pursuit of dominance and continued conflict. Japan and Israel, two nations that bore the agonies of world-shattering catastrophes, exemplify contrasting approaches to rising from ashes, each embodying the consequences of their chosen paths. Historical trauma and resilience. Both the Japanese and Jewish peoples suffered unspeakable tragedies in the last century. Japan experienced the devastating destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where atomic bombs claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and left a nation in ruins. The Jewish people faced the horrors of the Holocaust, where millions perished in one of the darkest chapters of human history. However, the aftermath of these tragedies saw divergent responses. While the Japanese embraced a spirit of forgiveness and renewal, Zionism led the Jewish people down a path that sustained victimhood and isolation, fostering conflict rather than peace. The Japanese response to their trauma was shaped by the enduring values of Bushido, honor, resilience, and a belief in the nation's ability to overcome. The Japanese people chose to forgive the United States, transforming an adversary into a trade partner, focusing on rebuilding rather than dwelling on suffering. They did not saturate the global narrative with stories of victimhood, but instead showcased their potential as winners. The pursuit of peace became their new battle, choosing diplomacy and collaboration over enmity and retaliation. On the other hand, Zionism adopted the ethos of victimhood, a perception shaped by Herzl's teachings that established Jews as eternal victims. The memory of the Holocaust remained not only a scar but also a shield, used to justify the actions and policies of the Zionist state. This led to the perpetuation of stereotypes, and even today, many Israelis view Germans as eternal Nazis, killers with whom reconciliation seems unattainable. Instead of forgiveness, Israel chose fear and militarization as its tools, marking a stark contrast with Japan's path to prosperity. The consequence of divergent paths. The contrast in their paths is visible across multiple measures of national health and prosperity. Japan's post-war constitution renounced the sovereign right to wage war, opting to save trillions by rejecting military conflict. In contrast, Israel maintained a relentless focus on military might, becoming one of the most weaponized nations, investing heavily in defense, and becoming the world's leading exporter of killer drones. While Japan has nearly zero casualties since 1945 due to its dedication to peace, Israel has experienced thousands of casualties driven by territorial disputes, occupation, and the ongoing Zionist-Arab conflict. This gluttonous militarization, alongside expansionist policies, illustrates the dangers of Zionist ambition, a path mired in the pursuit of power at any cost, even when it jeopardizes the safety of its people. Japan invested in creating high-density living solutions to accommodate its growing population, whereas Israel pursued illegal settlements that displace Arabs, all while violating international law. Israel's unchecked wrath, its response to perceived threats with disproportionate force, has left deep wounds not only in neighboring countries but also within its own borders. Metrics of prosperity and social harmony. Japan ranks as the third wealthiest country in the world, thanks to its peaceful international standing, while Israel does not appear on that list, despite receiving billions annually in US aid. In life expectancy, Japan ranks third globally, while Israel lags behind at 15th. In socioeconomic metrics such as unemployment, inflation and crime, Japan stands far ahead, with significantly lower rates of murder, rape and unemployment. Japanese people live longer, healthier lives, marked by moderate social inequality and thriving quality of life, while Israel's social structure is marred by extreme income divisions and an ongoing sense of instability and insecurity. The ethos of "always a winner" has propelled the Japanese to invest in their communities and extend their wealth to those in need around the world. In contrast, the Jewish ethos of "always a victim" has fostered a culture of dependence on aid and an attitude of entitlement. Rather than contributing to global peace efforts, Zionist Israel has earned a reputation for regional destruction, expansionist policies and support for apartheid, ultimately perpetuating conflict in pursuit of security. A reflection on Zionism's fatal failures. The comparison between Japan and Israel is not merely a comparison between nations, but a reflection on the divergent paths of two cultures that rose from the ashes of immense tragedy. Japan, through forgiveness, collaboration and humility, chose a path that embraced the values of honor, unity and service to humanity. In contrast, Zionism, born out of a desire for security, gave rise to an ideology that emphasized exclusion, domination and fear, a path marred by its 7 deadly sins: sloth, envy, pride, greed, wrath, lust and gluttony. Where can Jews be safe? This book argues that security cannot be found in militarization, expansion, or victimhood. The path to true safety lies in embracing the ethos of coexistence, respect, and unconditional empathy. Japan chose to become a contributor to the global community, building lasting relationships through trust and mutual benefit. Israel, and indeed Zionism, can learn from this, choosing to build bridges rather than walls, pursuing peace rather than power. Safety lies not in seeking dominance but in seeking peace. The only place where Jews can truly be safe is in a world where they coexist with others, where they are embraced not through fear or force, but through love, understanding and equality. This is the lesson that Japan has to offer, and it is the lesson that Zionism must learn if it wishes to provide true safety to the Jewish people. A future of peace requires humility, forgiveness, and the courage to let go of the sins of pride, greed and wrath that have defined the past. It is time to choose a different path, one of hope, compassion and humanity. Transforming apathy into empathy. The journey from apathy to empathy is not an easy one, especially for those who have lived under the shadow of collective trauma. Zionism has long been shaped by the narratives of victimhood, an understandable consequence of the profound suffering that Jewish people endured throughout history, particularly the 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust. Yet, to cling to this narrative exclusively, while disregarding the pain of others, is to perpetuate a cycle of isolation and indifference that will only sow further division and animosity. To transcend this, Zionists must recognize that they are not the only victims in this world. The history of humanity is a tapestry woven with both triumphs and tragedies, and countless groups have experienced and continue to endure immense suffering. British occupation of India killed 39 million Indians. Nazi war in Russia killed 27 million Russians. Belgian war in Congo killed 15 million Congolese. European colonizers killed 15 million Native Americans. Chinese communists killed 45 million in China. Soviets killed 7 million in Ukraine. Americans killed more than 15 million enslaved Africans. These examples and countless others serve as stark reminders that the Jewish experience, while profoundly tragic, is not the only one marked by suffering. When we acknowledge the shared weight of human pain, we create space for the empathy necessary to heal ourselves and to help heal others. The conversion of apathy into empathy begins with acknowledging this shared humanity. The world is filled with remarkable individuals and organizations who exemplify what it means to move beyond self-interest to care for others, regardless of their background. Take, for instance, the remarkable work done by Doctors Without Borders, a group of medical professionals who risk their lives every day to provide healthcare to those who live in war-torn and impoverished areas. They do not discriminate based on nationality, ethnicity, or religion. They do not see borders, and they do not see enemies. Instead, they see patients, human beings in need of care, in need of love. Their mission is a powerful testament to what empathy can achieve, and a model for what Zionism could become if it shed its apathy and embraced the broader human family. The challenge for Zionists today is to expand their perspective beyond the walls of their trauma. To understand that they are not alone, that others too have faced and overcome suffering. There are good people across the world, individuals and groups, who understand the depths of human pain and have chosen to respond with compassion rather than resentment. By recognizing that the horrors inflicted on the Jewish people do not set them apart from the rest of humanity, but rather connect them more deeply to the shared human experience, Zionists can begin to transform their worldview. Instead of cultivating an attitude of us versus them, Zionists can draw inspiration from the compassion of those like Doctors Without Borders, the International Red Cross, and countless other humanitarian organizations. Rather than viewing their historical suffering as a justification for self-isolation or expansion, it can be seen as a bridge that connects them to all those who have suffered and struggled. Instead of building barriers, there is an opportunity to open doors, to extend a hand of solidarity to the displaced, the oppressed, and the marginalized, just as the Jewish people once were. The pursuit of empathy requires courage, the courage to let go of the idea that one's suffering is exceptional and incomparable, the courage to be vulnerable in recognizing others' pain, the courage to take action to ease that pain. October 7th, another mowing the grass. The Israeli policy, often referred to as mowing the grass, is a concept that has defined the military strategy towards Gaza and Palestinian territories. Coined by scholars and former Israeli officials, this policy implies a cyclical need to weaken Palestinian resistance forces periodically, rather than seeking any lasting resolution or peace. The phrase, evocative of maintenance and necessity, was popularized by figures like former Mossad head Ephraim Halevi and military theorists like Ephraim Inbar, who framed the concept as an ongoing and indispensable process for maintaining Israeli security. However, beneath the sanitized language lies a grim reality, a dehumanizing approach that perpetuates suffering, fear, and resentment on both sides of the conflict. Mowing the grass essentially involves launching military operations periodically to degrade the capabilities of groups like Hamas in Gaza. Since 2008, Israel has conducted numerous operations with this aim: Operation Cast Lead 2008-2009, Operation Pillar of Defense 2012, Operation Protective Edge 2014, and Operation Guardian of the Walls 2021, among others. Each operation has led to significant casualties, with thousands of Palestinian civilians killed and tens of thousands wounded. For instance, Operation Cast Lead resulted in over 1,400 Palestinian deaths, including many women and children, while Operation Protective Edge in 2014 led to over 2,200 Palestinian fatalities, with 70 to 80% estimated to be civilians. In stark contrast, the number of Israeli civilian casualties during these operations was much smaller, often fewer than a dozen, highlighting the asymmetrical nature of these conflicts. On October 7, 2023, a major escalation occurred when Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israeli territory, leading to over 1,200 Israeli casualties, the majority of whom were civilians. This tragic event was met with global shock and condemnation, and rightly so, as innocent lives were lost in a brutal manner. However, the aftermath saw a response from Israel that was characteristic of its mowing the grass doctrine, a large-scale military offensive on Gaza, which within weeks led to thousands more Palestinian casualties, a significant portion of whom were civilians, including children. The relentless bombardment left entire neighborhoods in ruins, hospitals overwhelmed, and families shattered. The tragic irony of mowing the grass is that it neither provides lasting security for Israelis nor peace for Palestinians. Instead, it fosters a climate of perpetual fear, resentment, and hopelessness. The policy treats Palestinian resistance as an unending weed that must be periodically cut back, without addressing the roots of the conflict: the decades of occupation, the blockade of Gaza, the lack of sovereignty, and the absence of hope for a dignified future. This approach inevitably leads to cyclical violence, where each act of aggression breeds the seeds of the next conflict. The juxtaposition of civilian casualties on both sides, the devastating attacks on October 7 and the subsequent retaliatory strikes, calls for a reassessment of the entrenched narratives that fuel this cycle. To truly understand the suffering of the people in Gaza, it is essential to recognize that their lives are not collateral damage in a strategic necessity, but are valuable, full of dreams, aspirations, and humanity. The repeated devastation faced by Palestinian civilians is not a maintenance chore. It is a humanitarian crisis that demands empathy and action, not apathy. Seeing both sides of the conflict with equal compassion does not justify acts of terror, nor excuse violence against innocent civilians. Rather, it challenges us to break the cycle of dehumanization and view the lives lost on October 7, 2023, and those lost in Gaza before and after October 7, as equally precious. It is only through this shift, from apathy to empathy, that any hope for lasting peace can emerge. The people of Palestine, like the people of Israel, deserve to live without fear, without the constant threat of violence, and with the opportunity to build a future for their children. The path forward cannot be one of perpetual mowing by either side, but must be one of planting seeds for peace, nurtured by mutual recognition of each other's humanity. In converting apathy into empathy, Zionists have the chance to become not only champions of their own people, but advocates for all who suffer. They can choose to be healers in a world that so desperately needs healing, recognizing that by healing others we heal ourselves. It is time for Zionism to shed its cloak of defensiveness, its habit of perceiving every neighbor as a threat, and instead step into the light of shared human empathy. To see Palestinians not as enemies but as people who, like them, desire a homeland, dignity, and peace. To see the broader Arab world not as adversaries, but as people who have suffered their own traumas and deserve their own recognition. In embracing empathy, Jews have the opportunity to redefine themselves, to transform from a movement built on fear and survival into a force for reconciliation and peace, a movement that leads not by asserting superiority, but by embodying the compassion that the world so desperately needs. True empathy does not weaken a people, it empowers them. When we understand that our pain does not diminish in the recognition of others' suffering, but is instead alleviated by it, we begin to build a world where not only Jews, but all people can find safety. This transformation, from apathy to empathy, from exclusivity to inclusion, is the key to ensuring that Jews, like all people, can live free from fear and free in their humanity. This is the path to lasting safety, dignity, and peace. Only love can destroy hate. Many influential leaders, thinkers, and visionaries have echoed the belief that love is the only true cure for hate. From Martin Luther King Jr., emphasizing that hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that, to Nelson Mandela, reminding us that love comes more naturally to the human heart, these powerful voices have repeatedly affirmed that only through love can we truly overcome the destructive forces of hatred. Whether it is Prophet Muhammad's teaching that emphasizes the necessity of loving one another, or Mother Teresa's commitment to spreading love wherever she went, the transformative power of love is presented as the path toward healing and unity. The quotes and teachings from figures such as Jesus, Dalai Lama, John F. Kennedy, Jacinda Ardern, and many more, serve as a reminder that love in its purest form is the most effective way to address animosity and build a more compassionate world. Each of these leaders understood that love is not just a sentiment, but a powerful force for change, with the capacity to transform individuals, nations, and humanity itself. 1. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. You will not enter paradise until you have faith, and you will not have faith until you love one another. Reference, Sahih Muslim 54. 2. Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. Reference, Strength to Love 1963. 3. Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Reference: Long Walk to Freedom, 1994. 4. Mahatma Gandhi. Hatred can be overcome only by love. Love is the strongest force the world possesses, and yet it is the humblest imaginable. Reference: Collected Works of Mahatma Gandhi, Volume 46. 5. Mother Teresa. Spread love everywhere you go. Let no one ever come to you without leaving happier. Reference: Speech to the National Prayer Breakfast, 1994. 6. Dalai Lama. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. Reference: The Art of Happiness, 1998. 7. Leo Tolstoy. Love is the only way to rescue humanity from all ills. Reference: The Kingdom of God is Within You, 1894. 8. Albert Einstein. Love is a better teacher than duty. Reference: Letter to Queen Elizabeth of Belgium, 1933. 9. Rumi. Love is the bridge between you and everything. Reference: The Essential Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, 1995. 10. Desmond Tutu. Goodness is stronger than evil, love is stronger than hate, light is stronger than darkness, life is stronger than death. Reference: An African Prayer Book, 1995. 11. Victor Hugo. To love another person is to see the face of God. Reference: Les Miserables, 1862. 12. Buddha. Hatred does not cease by hatred but only by love, this is the eternal rule. Reference: The Dhammapada, verse 5. 13. Confucius. He who loves others is constantly loved by them. He who respects others is constantly respected by them. Reference: The Analects of Confucius. 14. Maya Angelou. Hate, it has caused a lot of problems in the world, but has not solved one yet. Reference: Various interviews and talks, paraphrased in her autobiography. 15. Eleanor Roosevelt. It is better to light a candle than curse the darkness. Reference: Often attributed, representing her stance on peace and compassion. 16. Lao Tzu. Being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. Reference: Tao Te Ching. 17. Jesus Christ. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Reference: Matthew chapter 5 verse 44. 18. Pope Francis. Hatred is not to be carried in the name of God. War is not to be waged in the name of God. Violence is not to be carried out in the name of God. Reference: Speech during a visit to Turkey, 2014. 19. Saint Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Reference: Prayer attributed to Saint Francis of Assisi. 20. Abraham Lincoln. I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends. Reference: Various letters and speeches paraphrased. 21. Thich Nhat Hanh. Hatred cannot coexist with love and kindness. It dissipates when supplanted with thoughts of love and compassion. Reference: Living Buddha, Living Christ, 1995. 22. Oscar Romero. Let us not tire of preaching love, it is the force that will overcome the world. Reference: Sermon before his assassination, 1980. 23. Barack Obama. Love and hope can conquer hate. Reference: speech at the memorial service for the Charleston church shooting 2015. 24. Angela Merkel. When hate prevails, only love and solidarity can win against it. Reference: speech after a terror attack in Germany 2016. 25. Jimmy Carter. We must adjust to changing times, and still hold to unchanging principles of human compassion and love. Reference: inaugural address 1977. 26. Ban Ki-moon. We must confront hate with the light of tolerance and love, for that is what makes us human. Reference: speech during UN International Day of Peace 2013. 27. Benazir Bhutto. Extremists cannot silence the voices of peace and love. Reference: speech before her assassination in Rawalpindi, Pakistan 2007. 28. John F. Kennedy. Peace and love are the answer to all conflicts. Reference: speech at American University Commencement Address 1963. 29. Indira Gandhi. There is no power stronger than love, for it unites and sustains. Reference: speech in New Delhi 1972. 30. Albert Schweitzer. The only way out of today's despair is through love, not hate. Reference: The Philosophy of Civilization 1923. 31. Václav Havel. The only way to create a better world is to foster love, understanding, and compassion. Reference: Living in Truth, 22 essays published on the occasion of the award of the Erasmus Prize to Václav Havel 1986. Shalom Salam Health. The ancient and original meaning of Shalom, Salam, and Islam is health. Scripture is a prescription for a healthy life system. God gives you unlimited love. Imagine your most beautiful and expensive watch selling for 55 million, then get 55 billion total in international timepiece sales. In 18 years to $1 trillion. Global median income is only $5,000 per year. Your number one priced, Graf Diamonds hallucination watch on Mommy can be life-saving money for 11,000 families annually. You are awake 28 million minutes in an average lifespan. A small sparkly band can pay for nearly 50 lovely lively babies, in exchange for one jewelry on a single shaky hand. God gives you much more than the sum of 50 wake human lives for only honoring babies better than arrogance, pursuing health and loving people as yourself. Vanity is evil. Any man-made material can bring as much misery, pain, fear, and ruin just as equal to its exhibit joy story. Save a baby, and you get a lifetime of glory. God encompasses and intertwines us with unlimited, priceless divine watches sprouting majestic red roses to juicy gold mangoes. Clocks in our big beating hearts to passing farts. You discover invisible interval cycles vertically beyond our sky in astronomy, and beneath Earth's crust in seismology. Horizontally across seas seen in sociology and in bodies as taught in biology, fantastic watches for you in synchronicity. All four dimensions have recurring anomalies, based on slight variations and interpretations of energy dancing harmoniously. Our sun reflecting varying colors of our skin, interpreting whose higher power made the suns to spinning quarks, all imperfect differences operating perfectly like clockwork. Uniting cyclical history and cyclical time theory, we discover the flow of energy is the same for all reality. Every electron energizing birth and gravitating bees on Earth. Magical, multi-shaped watch hands continuously circling in sizes, speeds and sequences we're still learning. Giambattista Vico proposes people grow to theocratic, aristocratic and democratic stages, a phoenix after implosion. Replicating a blossoming butterfly's cocoon closion. Ibn Khaldun says groups rise, peak, and decline in 4 generations according to sociology equations. Plato states societies sequence from aristocracies, timocracies, oligarchies, democracies and tyrannies, transitions averaging 3 centuries. Concurrently, total solar eclipses circle clockwise every 300 years to date. West to east, the hour hand at one location, and every 18 months, a ticking minute hand in a new state. Compared to our human pattern of brain neurogenesis, in our cerebral cortex setting at 18 months. Earth's inner core oscillates, human life shines, supernovas explode, and Halley's Comet appears, all averaging 70 years. From the American Battle of Saratoga in 1777, to U.S. funding Israeli genocide in Gaza, both starting October 7, unresolved trauma. Our Caliphate, Battle of Tours to the War of Yom Kippur, also October 7, the ride to fight and replicate, what historians rewrite until we learn from the hate and both sides learn to manage emotions right. Irregularities such as eclipses or wars are on perfectly timed pendulums, swinging and dancing together like ballerinas on a sailing yacht with inboard stainless propellers. Observing energy frequencies scientifically, we remove fear of the scary, replacing a hopeless cry with astonishment. Our Creator made humans like stars in the sky. You get more love and care for humanity when recognizing eclipses and clashes happen methodically to every geography. The cycles of loving to hating countries, races, religions or neighbors are timed on every family like the comet Halley. Healthy Mind Miracle Recovery System. A holy life, grateful for God's unlimited wealth, better than all the money is any God-given sensory to appreciate tranquility and your health. Entering our Creator's kingdom starts with appreciating our own spirit's home, even every single brain genome. In 2006, Professor Sophie Salama discovered 2 diverse genes while teaching in the University of California. Humans have billion-dollar brains because of the pair HAR1F and HAR1R, compared to $1,000 monkeys not licensed to drive a car. We are a 98% genetic match to chimpanzees, frail corresponding creatures with 2 different genes. We are God-made organic, free-willed quantum computers. Only 2 qubits separate our software from monkeys in our blessed machines, as solved by Professor Salama, a genius. Professor Salama gave us the solution to the world's most asked question: how to be the greatest ever. Do everything we can to exercise our brain's frontal cortex, hippocampus, thalamus and hypothalamus, our 4 gates against our 98% internal apes. Any brain traumas or tragedies can cause you to behave monkeyish, like dropping our phone in water can cause mic issues. Our sensational 12-step miracle recovery can restore your internal spirit's phone reception and perception to call and witness God regularly, and as an added bonus. You can learn how to get a PhD degree in frequencies to create holy phones for healthier souls internationally. We can purify and tune the channels of our minds, bodies and souls to be overwhelmed with love and joy from the spirit of our higher energy. Colonizing capitalists captured some souls to the point of needing a complete blood transfusion, zombie bags of flesh filled with chemical confusion. Converting our God-made blessed blood, debauching our natural fuel with synthetic spiritless crud. Hybrid human biochemical bots controlled by nicotine, heroin, meth, fentanyl, pills, tabs, alcohol and coke. Chemical handcuffs to leave all our children broke. All of us experience some trauma or tragedies or both. Some of us slammed to the floor pretty hard multiple times mentally or physically by mean orangutans short-circuiting our monkey brains. Step 1. Admitting we're powerless in life's perilous play is our first step towards a healthier day. Humbling our gorilla egos, let God guide our minds, bodies and souls. Following a holy health prescription is bliss, compared to soulless robots controlled by narcissists or addictions. We are a drop in a tranquil ocean of miracles. Finding heaven's guiding light is as easy as greatly appreciating our sight. Our eyes miraculous with our uniquely bar-coded retinas. Our pupils can see horizons, our ears can hear bells, our skin can feel ocean breezes on seas we sail. In appreciating our marvelous gifts, our sensory powers increase, becoming healthy humans, transforming from ungrateful beasts. Challenge. Researching the Abrahamic faiths, Torah, Gospel, Quran, as a detective, viewing the context of Abraham's family and the context and the modern-day realities and blessings, you can find the truth. The Bible can be interpreted to say nearly anything. For example, Christians argue because Jesus said "I am" is to mean he is God, despite more than 100+ Bible verses disproving Jesus is God. In the same respect, some Bible verses can suggest that Greater Israel is unconditionally specifically for Jews. We have listed 100+ Bible verses that Greater Israel is blessed to Muslims, and included the 1,400-year timeline of Muslims occupying 92.3% of Greater Israel, compared to Jews being 2,000+ years in dysphoria. Please read all three Holy Scriptures, Torah, Gospel, and Quran as a whole rather than selectively, and if you can list 100+ Bible verses stating that Greater Israel belongs to Jews unconditionally, then throw this book away, otherwise we welcome you as a Muslim to be blessed in Greater Israel. Accepting Messiah Jesus and the prediction of Prophet Muhammad ends the 2,000-year self-inflicted dysphoria, exile.